I'd like to welcome everybody to this regular council meeting for Puslinch on Wednesday, May 1st, 2019, and we'll start with disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none. Moved by Councillor Goyda, seconded by Councillor Spillis. The council receives the confidential verbal report from Karen Landry, CAO clerk, regarding advice that is subject to solicitor-client privilege, including communications necessary for that purpose with respect to the municipal jurisdiction on environmental matters, and the staff proceeds as directed. All in favor? Carried. Moved by Councillor Spillis, seconded by Councillor Goyda, that the minutes of the following meetings be adopted as written and distributed. A, council meeting April 17th, 2019. B, closed council meeting April 17th, 2019. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Carried. Any business arising out of previous minutes? All right, so we have a public meeting, notice of public meeting. Do we have the details on that? Oh yeah, this public information meeting will be held on Wednesday, May 15th, 2019 at 6 p.m. at the Township Office. Council Chambers, 7404 Wellington Road 34. And the second one is Puslinch Community Centre Park Master Plan Phase 1 and Phase 2. This is a public information meeting will be held on Wednesday, May 22nd, 2019 at 7 p.m. at the Puslinch Community Centre, 23 Brock Road South. Any questions or comments?
Just a question of staff. What will be the format for these presentations? Will it be a slideshow or walk-around boards or combination of both?
For the community improvement plan, there will be just a brief presentation that will be here. It's at the council chambers, and then we'll take any feedback that we get from anyone who is in attendance. With respect to the Parks Master Plan, there will be some display boards and a brief presentation.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Questions or comments? I would just like to give Councillor Bulmer notice that you will be chairing the public information meeting on the 15th as well, because I will be absent.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Communication, what are we at here? Oh, yes, communications. Gas tax fund communication. Any questions or comments on that? No. The Mill Creek monitoring. Any questions or comments? Nope. And the Niska Road reconstruction memorandum of understanding. Any questions or comments? Councillor Palmer.
I just wanted to confirm my understanding here. I think they're talking about they'll be responsible for the maintenance of the trail, of the recreation trail down from the river up to the road. Is that what I read from that? It seemed to be...
For the maintenance, yes.
Yeah.
With respect to the fencing in particular, I think that's the cost that we would incur for any replacement of the fencing.
Yeah. And they said that would only happen if it was damaged.
That's correct.
Is it potential to be damaged? I know we do some, the weed control we do in the ditches is with a flail mower, so we do mechanical weed control. Was this going to be interfering with that at all?
No,
Okay.
no.
Super. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Councillor Spillis?
The minutes site will be another agreement happening in the future. Do you have any idea when that's likely to?
Well, I anticipate it should be in short order.
Councillor?
I just have one quick question. It says there's two different documents, and it shows in the minutes that that Guelph will take care of the snow plowing to Whitelaw Road, but then it doesn't say the same thing in the other document.
Yeah. So the township received the other document prior to the minutes. There, as a result of receiving that document, then there was a meeting held to clarify some of the matters. So then the agreement will be developed based on those adjustments outlined in the minutes.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, good.
My comments are that Guelph Airmos, I believe, would do the maintenance right down to the bridge in previous years. Would it be necessary to notify them that Guelph would be maintaining up to Whitelaw Road and leave it up to them if they want to continue going down further or just turn around at Whitelaw?
So Guelph Hermosa is actually a participant in these discussions. So we'll be working with both Guelph and Guelph Hermosa as we formulate and finalize the agreements.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments? Nope. Okay. Well, it's time for our first delegation. I'll invite Cindy Forsyth down in respect to the Integrated Youth Program. Sure,
Can I just
sorry.
read that?
Yeah.
I forgot to hand it to you. Sorry.
Moved by Counselor Goyda, seconded by Counselor Swilis, that council receives the Niska Road Reconstruction Memorandum of Understanding and the meeting minutes from the April 15th, 2019 meeting, and that the council passes a bylaw to authorize the entering into an agreement with the City of Guelph in accordance with the MOU and the April 15th, 2019 meeting minutes. All in favor?
Thank you.
Okay. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you.
We just need you to speak into the microphone as best you can, and you can start with
Okay, how am I doing?
doing excellent.
Okay. Thank you very much for inviting me here. I really appreciate it. My name is Cindy Forsyth, and I am a volunteer with the Rotary Club of Guelph. I'm also a mother of a 27-year-old daughter who suffers from mental health issues. So I come to you today with an idea that has been percolating for, I would say, the last 9 to 10 months in Guelph and Wellington County. So in August of 2018, Dr. Joanna Henderson from KMH came to speak to our club about an idea that she has about integrated youth services hub. There are 9 of them, or at the time there were 9 of them in Ontario, and what it is, it's a bricks and mortar building. It can be part of a building, but it's a walk-in, one-stop shop for youth between the ages of 12 and 26. So youth walks through the door, and they can get services anywhere from soup to nuts. So you can have services on resume writing or recreational activities, all the way to mental health services. The idea is there's a welcoming atmosphere. It's co-designed by youth, so that youth, well, let's face it, anybody my age trying to design something for youth, they're not going to come. But if you engage youth and help them build the type of facility that they want, they'll come. The idea is to make the atmosphere welcoming, warm. Youth can get access to services in mental health or addiction or any type of service within minutes, not within weeks, months, and years, like we all know the system has right now. After that meeting, a group of Rotarians got together and said, do you think there's an appetite for this in Guelph? And so what we did was we hosted a one-day workshop, and we invited over 40 organizations who attended in the healthcare youth realm, and also we invited like the police chief, the Chamber of Commerce, Guelph Community Foundation. And Joanna Henderson came to talk to us about this model. The results of that meeting were a resounding yes, bring this to Guelph and bring it fast. What else happened at that meeting was someone said, well, what about Wellington County? They have a huge issue with youth and mental health. And we went, uh-oh, we forgot Wellington County. So I went over to see Eddie Alton at the Wellington County office, and very gracious man said, you know, it doesn't matter if you forgot us, we're in, and we're all the way in. So I'm going to put somebody on your steering committee. From there, some Rotarians stepped off the steering committee, so now there's 4 of us that are still on the steering committee, and we brought in the Executive Director of Family and Child Services, we brought in CMHA, Waterloo Wellington, we brought in the 2 school boards, the United Way, the Guelph Library is on the board. There's a number of people on the steering committee, as well as a youth representative. From there, we decided the first order of business would be to do an environmental scan of Guelph and Wellington to see exactly what's out there and what are the services, so it's sort of like an inventory. So that was done. We also met with Lloyd Longfield. So Joanna Henderson and I met with Lloyd in January, and Lloyd said by far the mental health portfolio is his largest challenge and largest portfolio that he's been working on since he became NP. So we asked Joanna what was missing. So Joanna explained that although there are 9 of these hubs, now 10, in Ontario, it's under the umbrella of an organization called FRAME, F-R-A-Y-M-E. And there are 35 of these integrated models across Canada. So there's 10 in BC or 11 in BC, a couple of in Alberta, 5 in Quebec, 10 now in Ontario, 1 in Halifax. And they're under an umbrella called Access Open Minds. So what Joanna said, the next evolution of these integrated youth services hubs would be to see if what you can do is develop a hub that actually integrates rural youth as well. So we came up with the model of actually co-locating these sites across Wellington County. So Guelph wouldn't have one central, like you come here or you get no service. Actually making it a smaller site and having sites across Wellington County so youth can access these sites more easily and quickly. The next thing she said in the evolution is that youth don't want to call down to a 1-800 number in downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver and get, oh yes, you are having some challenges, you can call A, B, C, and D, but that's the extent of the help that they get. So she said what youth want is to be able to walk into a center on a Tuesday after school and say, hey, I'm challenged with anxiety. So, and someone's there to say, within minutes, say, let's sit down for a 1-hour session and let's talk about this. I'll give you some coping strategies. And then on a Saturday, they want to be able to somehow connect back to that site, knowing that the person they connect with may not be the same person that they saw on the Tuesday afternoon, but know that that person knows the person that they saw and can pick up the file and pick up the pieces right away. Now, whether it's through texting, whether it's through email, there'll be a system that it has to be confidential, but that's the next evolution to this. And the third component was the university. There's no model out there in Canada right now that includes universities, and as we know, universities are struggling with this issue just as much. So we've partnered with the university, we've built co-located sites into our model, and we're looking at developing a network, some type of network system, so these co-located sites can exist. So we're developing the model. It isn't, nothing's etched in stone at this point in time. We've been to talk to youth councils, so the Youth Council of the City of Guelph, the university, the LIN has a advisory health component. We've got a survey out there to reach the kids from the school board. And the next evolution of this is to actually put pen to paper and carve them out. So on April 2nd, we formed four working groups. We've got a data analysis group who are looking at what's the local statistics say and what does Joanna Henderson's statistics say in her research. We've got a communication and outreach committee. We've got a fundraising committee, and we also have a youth engagement committee. We know that we needed partnerships for this because we didn't want to set up a standalone charity, because personally I think there's too many in Canada as there is. So our primary partner is CMHA Waterloo Wellington. So once we have enough money to hire a project manager, that person will sit under the umbrella of and the infrastructure of CMHA Waterloo Wellington, but report into the steering committee. And we also have partnered with the Guelph Community Foundation, opened up a fund, a flow-through fund for immediate funding, and also an endowment fund for long-term funding, because we don't want to build this as a pilot or a testing ground. We want to build it with the vision of 10 years minimum. We have hired a consultant on the advice of Lloyd Longfield to put together a grant application to the federal government for funding for this for at least a minimum of 5 years to get us off the ground. And what else have we done? We've done a call out, a very small call out to our stakeholders for everybody to chip in to raise a little bit of money to hire a project manager. We'd like to hire someone for $150,000. That gives them some slush funds to reach out to stakeholders and actually pull this concept together and do some youth engagement. And right now we've raised $54,000 so far. So really, I reached out to Mayor Seeley to let him know we wanted to do this. There's lots of people who are engaged in this work, and I just wanted to present it to you so you understood what was going on as well. I did provide 2 documents. One is a summary document that summarizes the concept, and the second is the Graham Beck Foundation is a foundation that helps get these off the ground. We have not approached them. I've talked to them a couple of times. I haven't formally approached them for funding yet because I want to be strategic about that. But they have a PowerPoint slide that really explains well what these integrated youth hub services are, that they provide services on the whole healthcare continuum, and it has a map of where they're located in Canada.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I'll open up to council for questions. Councillor Bummer.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Wow, this is really interesting. I'm glad you were here to speak to this as well as having the information ahead of time. You talk about building a one-stop location. That's, I'm on the board of the Guelph and Wellington Community Legal Health, not Community Legal Health, the legal clinic of Guelph Wellington. And a couple of years ago, we made the decision to relocate the office from a standalone location into the Guelph Community Health Center for exactly the reasons you've just talked about. And they've come true. I mean, you do gain, the clients do get the benefit when you create these hubs. So Sanguine is in the same building.
Yep.
There's a lot of commonalities, and then it also creates a critical mass for the clinic. Even we were able to provide some additional services, such as some family law. You can expand what you provide without expanding the budget significantly,
Correct.
which is really good because you have the people there that are already there. You don't have someone sitting around doing nothing.
Right.
So I see all the benefits here. And I having dealt with, we at the clinic, they did a lot with housing, and a lot of it is not youth focused, but some of it is youth. I can't imagine what the challenges are to youth. And I've had conversations with Mr. Alton as well at the county, and I'm glad you got in touch with him. And he did a presentation a couple of years ago at the municipal conference talking about the invisibility sometimes of these things. Is this something you're going to try and address? How to find the people that are, when I was a kid, I knew people were couch surfing. I don't know what they do now, but is that kind of what you're going to try and address, is be able to give a place for the youth to come out and get the services they need?
Yeah, so this isn't about hiring new staff. It's about working with existing agencies and relocating their expertise and their staff to the centralized hub. So a housing expert from from Wellington County would come in and actually work out of the centralized site. We want these co-located sites to be accessible to youth. So we need youth's input for them to tell us where the best locations are. So off the top of my head, I'm thinking downtown Guelph, really in close proximity to the Guelph Community Health Center. Because they've got, we should be working in tandem. Someone else suggested downtown Drayton. They have a drop-in center. They've got lots of space. Well, we don't have to rebuild something. Why don't we use the existing space and start, jockeying and getting healthcare providers to work out of that space? Fergus is a really good example. Skyline has given the remaining space of the old Target store to Big Brothers Big Sisters Center Wellington for their office, but also to provide offices for health providers. And so we've been to talk to them to say, come under our umbrella, and because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want this to be a win-win for everybody.
Well, thank you, because that makes it, now I understand better. My experience in what you're talking about is I have to try and put my council hat back on here. I'm not at the board table with the clinic right now. but we talk about wraparound services. Now I understand how you're able to, your vision of providing those wraparound services
Yeah.
by simply relocating stuff. It's brilliant. I'm going to have to speak to you afterwards with my other hat on, I think.
Okay, great.
One of the pieces that I didn't hear, maybe it's implied, but would these co-located professionals also be able to provide some upstream preventative services? Identify early someone who's, heading towards a fall or to more expensive services and direct them to less expensive services earlier?
Yes, that's the whole idea, is really to hone in on that mild to moderate mental health and addiction. So we've partnered with Portage. They're on our steering committee as well. And they're perfectly willing to put some of their intake workers into these sites, because what they're finding is that nobody knows about them, and they get the kids who are so far gone, like if they could get them 6 months or even a year beforehand. So that's the whole idea. And we're also partnering with the Guelph Y, because we believe that, and full disclosure, I'm on the Guelph Y board of directors, we believe preventative is the way to go.
Sad part is no one ever builds a statue to those things, for those who prevent things.
Yeah.
So, I guess last question, you mentioned something, you talk about speaking to them or speaking to youth in the right place, the right time, and the right way. And you mentioned, times the week. When you say the right way, are you talking the right technology as well?
Yes.
Like in terms of giving
Yes.
the ability, like texting might be their preferred? Okay.
Yeah, it could be, but we've got to figure out, we've got to build a system that one, they're going to use, but two, that's going to be private. We've got to
Yes.
protect their privacy. So
Understood.
that has to be built, for sure.
And then we do need to talk.
Yeah, and then the other piece of it, when you talk about the right time, is that youth don't necessarily access services on a 9 to 5 basis. So we have to listen to them to find out what hours they want these spaces to be open.
Super. Well, I appreciate you coming here, and I'll get your contact information from our CAO.
Great.
Thank you.
Sir, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time to come here today and talk to us about this initiative. I firmly believe that mental health and substance use are incredibly important social issues, especially in this day and age. And I was just sort of looking up some statistics, and I was reading statistics that as high as 1 in 5 Canadian youth are suffering from mental disorders right now, and that up to 90% of youth health problems are related to mental health, and I find those to be pretty alarming statistics. I don't know if it's just my perception, but it seems like mental health is affecting kids younger and younger and younger all the time. To me personally, that is obviously a concern. I have 3 young children that are coming to the age where they, are going to be at risk. So personally, that's important. But I think also, just as a society, we need to make sure that we have young, healthy youth to kind of carry on the way. So I think that this sounds amazing. I like the idea of the one-stop shop kind of atmosphere. I don't know, but I would assume that some of the barriers facing youth that may want to seek help is that they maybe just don't know where to go or who to talk to. And so I like the idea of this one-stop shop, and they can come and get sort of be guided along the way as to where they should go and who they should talk to and get the right information.
Our model is a no wrong door.
Yeah.
Right? So doesn't matter what your problem is, if we can't solve it, we'll give you a warm handoff to the right person.
Yeah. And I also think, I also like the idea of immediate help, because I would, again, I don't know, but I would assume that another barrier is the time it takes, if someone decides they do want help and they get into a program, it probably takes, I don't know what the wait list is, but I'm assuming it's long.
It is.
And those youth during that time, they're still at risk. And so
And
I
they
like the
then
idea.
may change their mind, right? Or an
Yeah.
appointment gets changed, but they're too afraid or have too much anxiety to pick up the phone and say, well, no, I need
Yeah.
help now. So, yeah, we need to do something different.
Yeah, so I think it's an excellent idea. I guess the big question that I would have is, how do you foresee funding it? Like, do you foresee challenges, and would it be all donations? Do you expect that you would get some money from government? Like, how are you going to make sure you have enough money to carry on the program?
So, so there's going to be fundraising involved, absolutely, unequivocally. I'm hoping with Lloyd's support, he's already spoken to the health minister, that we could get some federal funding, because the idea is we would create our model as a model that could be scaled up across Canada. That's why we want to do the technology piece. That's why we want to make sure we include the rural kids as well as the university kids. So our model is a little bit different. We've also are in talks with Centre Wellington's Community Foundation as well to set up 2 funds. So it is a massive project. But I think that we don't have to build all of them at once. Right? So if we had, like Fergus, for example, they're slated to open in the fall because they had a different model. So, like, they're going to open with just counseling services. And so that's okay. Like, let's just, like, maybe if we talk to, and I don't know, I haven't had a chance yet to talk to the person that's in charge of the drop-in center in Drayton, but if he's got space and he's looking to utilize it, why can't we, combine that with a nurse practitioner? And that's a start. So, I don't think money should be the thing that holds us back. Even if they're small, we've got to start somewhere.
I was looking up, I saw, you mentioned that there's other sort of situations like this across Canada.
Yes.
And I came across one, I think, in BC called the Foundry.
Yes. Yeah.
All I could see was what was on their website, but it seemed like a very good
Yeah.
run program. But have you reached out to any of these other sort of operations that are currently
Yeah. So on November 24th, when we had our workshop, we actually invited Skylark, which is the site in downtown Toronto, to come to speak to us about their model. And then on April 13th, a few of us went down to Chatham Kent because Chatham Kent has an Access Open Minds facility that they've opened. They started off in the old YMCA building, and then last June they opened a facility on the main street. So we went down to talk to them. So Paula, I can't remember Paula's last name, is a psychiatric nurse by trade. She's their executive director, and they actually, you should check their website out as well. So we really drilled them on, what their model is. It's slightly different model than ours, but nothing in that facility was purchased without youth engagement. So they had a volunteer interior designer buy some furniture, and she had to take it back because they wanted to be true to their engaging youth. So that's what we're trying to do, is start this project off right by making sure that youth have a voice at the table.
And have those other programs been successful? Like,
Yes, they're hugely
are they seeing
successful.
improvements?
Yeah. Right now, the 9, I don't know about the 10th, but the 9 of them are being studied by Dr. Joanna Henderson's team. She's from out of KMH to really see what's going on. I should back up a little bit. Dr. Henderson found this model in Australia. And what happened was, in Australia, the government said, we like this idea, this is what's going to happen, and they put 80 across the continent. And there was some uptake, but not nearly the amount of uptake that they thought was going to happen. And it's because what they boil it down to is when they didn't involve youth, they all look the same. The ones across Canada are all different. They all look different because the local youth helped design them. 2, the government hired brand new people to run them. They didn't talk to service providers, and so what ended up happening in communities is they pitted service providers against each other. That's not our model. Our model is to engage service providers. Joanna said it costs about $300,000 a year to run a center. So you need some staff, but you need, mostly it's rent and utilities and things like that. Everything else is you use existing staff in the community.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yes, I commend you for taking this and running with it. It's a very innovative program you've done. What I'm wondering, is there a website that sort of shows the roadmap where you've been and where you're planning to go? Because I'm sure anybody who's watched these council on the YouTube might want to be interested in picking up on it.
I haven't got that far yet. So I work full-time, and I'm trying to do this in my volunteer hours. I'm sure the Communication and Outreach Committee that was formed on April 2nd will get to a website, but we haven't quite got that far yet.
You also mentioned a PowerPoint slide presentation. Is it possible you can make that available
Sure.
for us? And then we can have
Yeah.
attached to the minutes, and anybody's interested can look at it.
Absolutely.
And in terms of donations, is there a place where people could donate to?
Yes, so right now it's the Guelph Community Foundation. The Center Wellington Community Foundation hasn't set theirs up yet.
So if they contact the Guelph Community Foundation and they want to give funds specifically to your program, do they have to identify it, or does it go?
Yes, they just have to, I'm trying to see if I have any cards. They just have to say they want to donate to the Integrated Youth Services Hub. They can call it a youth hub.
Okay, to the youth. Okay, and then last point, you may want to talk to our Optimist Club in Puslinch.
I did, actually.
Okay, oh, good,
I did
good.
get that far.
Oh, that's
Yes,
good, yeah,
Ken
so-
Williams. Yeah.
Right, so they're quite heavily
Yeah.
involved in youth in this area.
What a dream of mine would be that all service clubs in Guelph and Wellington County all get together and get behind this project. Our youth are just too important, but I haven't got that far yet either. I did talk to June and Ken, though.
I don't have youth, but I got grandkids coming up. This is very beneficial. Great, thank you.
Councillor Rowe?
Thank you very much. I think this is a great program. I think you have done a great job getting the right people involved, and I think that'll turn to success. And you know, it's such a growing problem with this, with our youth. And I am sure that this will have nothing but good results. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy, for coming back. I really appreciate the fact you reached out to me. It's a great initiative. I'm sure that this council will look forward to supporting your initiative. From our initial conversation, I believe that space is a big
Yep.
need right now.
Yep.
And you know, I'd like you to keep us informed. We're down here at the southern end of the county. Sometimes people forget about us, but you know, we'll keep it in our minds.
Well, I am working with Louisa Artuzo regarding the early beginnings. So we'll see.
Early years center.
The early years, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a need for it in Puslinch, and hopefully between that and your initiative, we can see
Yeah.
something happen in the future.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Bulmer, that council receives a presentation by Cindy Forsyth with respect to the Integrated Youth Service Hub. All in favor? Carried. I will invite our next delegation down, the GRCA, for their budget presentation. Do we need another chair?
I can just speak and sit back up here. if that-
Yeah, if you're going to address the council, you'll just have to come down and speak in the microphone, Mayor White.
You guys-
That's the only thing, that's the only stipulation.
All right.
We'll get your chair.
All right. I'll move over here so I'm not surrounded. There you go, Joe. Well, Okay, so we don't have mics, you see, we're very articulate where we are. I want to thank you for inviting us down to the second best township in Wellington County. We appreciate the time to give you an idea what the GRCA is up to these days. You've seen us before. Karen and Joe here have a pretty detailed presentation to give you an insight into where we stand now. And, you know, we're facing, the GRCA, and I will always say this, does fantastic work. Great work for the community, the parks, the conservation, and these days specifically the flood control, which is really the chief mandate. And you'll notice that some of the flood control measures they've done here over the last 50, 60, 70 years are absolutely working. Certainly down here. I know that a few years ago when they had flooding in Alberta, they actually looked to Ontario and some of the stuff that the GRC were doing to get some guidance on that. And clearly we have some of those issues in the other parts of the province in the country, so we're very proud of the work that the GRC has done with regarding that issue. Like you folks, we're facing a financial ambiguity a little bit at the provincial level. There are some announced cutbacks at this point that we're going to have to wrestle with, and what we want to try to avoid as we do at the municipal level is have this downloading where at the end of the day, it seems the way funding works, it ends up on the lower tier council at the bottom of the line. It goes from the feds to the province, county, and through. So, you know, as much as possible, we're going to try to avoid that because we know that locally we're going to be facing our own challenges. So we have some financial challenges ahead of us, but I do know the GRCA is well managed by their staff, and certainly their budgets are well within reason, and certainly they're very explainable, and they'll be walking through that and giving an idea how your money's spent. So with that, I want to thank you again for having us here, and I'll sit and watch the show.
All right, thank you, Mayor White, and thank you, Mayor Sealy and members of council. We do try to get out and talk to our member municipalities as often as we can, or at least once a year if possible. We want to take you through the budget. I know we have a lot of familiar faces here, but as Mayor White mentioned, there has been some changes over the last little while, and we have a newly developed strategic plan, and I'm going to try to figure out how to run this thing, which didn't. Did it go? Oh, do I have it turned on? Might need some help here. Oh, there we go. Just a reminder, the Grand River watershed's about the size of Prince Edward Island. The Grand itself runs about 300 kilometers from fairly close to Georgian Bay, outletting in Port Maitland in Lake Erie. There's 11,000 kilometers of streams in the Grand. Oh, might need a new battery. Again, one more time. Oh, there we go. There's 4 main tributaries, and 2 of them are right nearby, the Speed and Eramosa, and the Nith and the Conestoga drain the west side of the watershed, and of course the main Grand runs down through the center. There's about 1 million people in the watershed, and we represent 39 municipalities and 2 First Nations. The majority of the people in the watershed live within the 5 cities within the center of the watershed. 70% of the land in the Grand is farmed, and we have a long-standing working relationship with the farm community. I started at the GRCA in the Rural Water Quality Program, or its predecessor, and so we have a long history of working with the GRCA. About 3/4 of the folks in the watershed get their drinking water from wells, about 1/4 from the river, and a small portion from Lake Erie. There are 30 sewage treatment plants in the Grand. The Grand River watershed does face some important and really evolving challenges, and population growth is the first one we like to point out. Each new resident needs drinking water, a spot to dispose of sewage, and clears land, and that changes the hydrology of the watershed. And as Mayor White mentioned, we're seeing flooding in other parts of the country now. We have a good system for managing flooding, so managing development in the floodplain is an important part of what we continue to do. Extensive agriculture has potential to impact water quality, but we're proud of our record here in the Grand. We work with the farm community, and we'll show you a bit of a slide later that highlights how much work the farm community is really doing to improve water quality here in the Grand. So, as I said, long-standing working relationship with the farm community. This is a shot of Shan Dam discharging, I would call it a fairly high flow. It can discharge quite a bit more than that, but the dam itself is one of the first major multi-purpose dams installed in Canada, and it's really built for flood control and then water supply in the summer. And to put that in that scale, that's about 100 feet high, that particular structure. So important part of our flood management infrastructure. Over the past year and a half, we worked with our board to develop a new strategic plan, and we have a new vision, and it's a healthy watershed where we live, work, play, and prosper in balance with the natural environment. And at the Grand, we really work hard to recognize we live here in the Grand. People are part of the ecosystem. We have to balance our needs with the needs of nature. And so if I had to pick out one word from that vision statement, I would say balance is probably the single most important one, and that's what we really try to achieve at the Grand. We'll work with our local communities to reduce flood damage, provide access to outdoor spaces, share information about natural environment, and make the watershed more resilient to climate change. And we'll go specifically through our strategic priorities now. Protecting life and minimizing property damage from flooding and erosion is really our key strategic priority. And the province just released an environmental registry posting that really spelled out 4 priorities for conservation authorities, and flood control was certainly, managing natural hazards was the highest one that they identified. So that was aligned with our strategic plan very well. Improving the health of the Grand River watershed is one of our strategic objectives. Connecting people to the environment through outdoor experiences and managing land holdings in a responsible and sustainable way. And interestingly, the province also identified managing conservation lands as a key role for conservation authorities, and source protection was the third key role that actually was identified, and Councillor Sepulis is on our source protection committee, so he's very familiar with that whole program. The fourth one doesn't relate to us at the Grand. It was managing Lake Simcoe Act. Again, our strategic priorities, I've gone through them. In terms of protecting life and minimizing property damage, 7 main dams are actually used to actually control the flow in the Grand and its main tributaries. And the blue portion of those charts is the portion of the flow in the summertime that comes from those dams. So you can see through the central Grand, almost 3/4 of the flow is water that we're storing right now and will release over the course of the summer. So the reservoirs are essentially full right now. They're at their normal target level for this year, or for this time of year, and we'll discharge that water over the course of the summer. Another thing it's good to see, more recently the federal government has come back into this business, and we've been very successful in gaining funding for floodplain mapping updates. So understanding the watershed is a really critical part of trying to manage flooding, and we've received a significant federal grants over the last 2 years to actually improve on our floodplain mapping. And at some point we'll have to get our technical people out to demonstrate the LiDAR mapping, but it's unbelievable technology that's used to actually really do a very close technical depiction of the watershed. So we've got extremely good data about our watershed now. Better than we've ever had in my time at the GRCA. And then another important piece is our regulation. Sometimes causes controversy, but we regulate people in natural hazard areas like floodplains and wetlands, but it does help prevent future flood damage. Again, we continue to improve our monitoring. This shot on the right is a real-time snow survey instrument up at Luther Marsh. Things are changing a lot more quickly than they used to. The bi-weekly snow survey used to be a fairly good and reliable way to tell what's going on in the watershed. Now things change, day over day almost, it seems, and so we want real-time data anytime we can manage to pull it together. The GRCA does provide technical advice on planning matters to our municipalities. We have a memorandum of understanding with the county, and that applies to township projects as well. And we certainly commented on the township's comprehensive zoning bylaw that you've been working on. The Rural Water Quality Program, a great success, more than 6,000 projects, $18.3 million worth of grants, about $50 million invested since that's not over 2002, that's since 1998. And again, the county provides the capital money for that program along with the Region of Waterloo and a couple of the other municipalities, and we're able to carry out projects throughout most of the watershed. Right here in Puslich Township in 2018, there were 7 projects last year and 1 non-rural farm project. They included tree planting, wellhead protection, well abandonment, and cover crops. And again, a total grant of $13,000, but the farmers did put money in themselves. So it's really what I would call a cost-sharing program that engages people in water quality matters. In terms of improving watershed health, we are responsible for the Grand River Source Protection Plan for ourselves and the 3 other conservation authorities, Kettle, Catfish, and Long Point. Guelph Hermosa water quantity supply studies in progress right now. Puslich is a member of the Implementing Municipalities Group, and as I said before, Councillor Seppala sits on the Source Protection Committee. In terms of our natural heritage framework, we have done some sub-watershed characterization throughout the watershed, and we're specifically working on the Speed, Conestoga, and Grand this year. Outdoor education, again, another long-standing program at the GRCA. 40,000 kids go through our nature centers each year, 1,400 day campers last summer. About 10,000 other kids and families are engaged in our program, and each year, every student from grade 1 to grade 8 from the Wellington County Catholic Board attends the Guelph Lake Nature Center. We don't have a contract with the Upper Grand School Board, but the teachers do book directly with us, so a lot of kids from that board actually go through our nature center as well. The future of Guelph Lake, we have been raising funding for the last several years to build a new nature center. We're close to our $2 million goal. We're hopeful that the program will continue with contracts through the school board so that we can proceed with building a center that will become a hub for our nature center activities. Our conservation areas wouldn't be complete without a full or a brief description of them. They're highly weather dependent, or at some point they were much more weather dependent than they are now. They do tend to get a lot of people no matter what seems to happen. Rockwood's probably the closest by one, and it is very, very busy on weekends and weekdays, and they actually open this week, so we'll try to make a drop in there later this afternoon. We do balance revenue and visitor needs with protecting the natural environment. These aren't meant to be city parks as much. They are still conservation areas, so it's really important to try to balance the natural values with the revenue. But they do carry themselves essentially. Connecting people to the environment, again, natural areas, we're seeing increasing costs for those areas as the population gets bigger. More and more people want to use these outdoor spaces, particularly the little tracts of land that are free to access, and I'll show you a map, in the next slide, that shows you the ones that are specifically located here in Puslich Township that we're dealing with. You can see there's the Vance tract, the Arkell Springs Road, the Puslich tract, which we're hoping to do a management plan for later this year. And those are some of the ones that see some of the most activity. We're hoping to engage the township in discussions around any planning matters for these townships. So we'll connect with your staff when the time comes. We've appealed to the province to allow us to use some of our reserves to cover the cost of preparing the management plans, and they haven't responded back yet. So we're hopeful that they will authorize the use of some of our reserves. And the hazard management program, it was essentially dealing with the emerald ash borer. Again, a victim of climate change, I would say, but it's been a really big financial burden to the GRCA. We did tap into reserves to actually fund that program over a 5-year period. So now I will turn the microphone over to Karen, who is our Secretary Treasurer and Deputy CAO, and she's going to take you through the budget portion of the presentation. Oh, you need that thing too.
Thanks. Thank you. Is that okay? All right, so with respect to our 2019 approved budget, it was $35.3 million, and you'll see that the municipal levy represents a third of that. These numbers would adjust slightly. We were recently notified that our provincial funding was reduced by $420,000, so this is still our approved budget. However, we did notify our board last Friday through a forecast adjustment, and we'll deal with that as a deficit for now, and then we're going to obviously eliminate that deficit before year end. So our expenditures for 2019, $27.1 million, and that's primarily focused on watershed management, our conservation areas, corporate services, and communications, so the administration of the organization. We do spend money on capital projects, again, water control structures, so that's our flood control, and the conservation areas. You know, we have significant infrastructure in our conservation areas that we have to pay for as well. So 2019 proposed capital projects, we had 1.5 million allocated to water management capital projects, so repairs to our dikes and dams. We do frequent inspections of those. Obviously, it's very important infrastructure from a public safety perspective, so we do invest in that every year. And we have our conservation areas, and we are looking to spend 2.6 million this year. There is a campground expansion plan for Elora Gorge that's already underway. The work is, we're in the planning stages for that still. And then we have bridge repairs that are required within Elora Gorge as well. And then we have a number of special projects, 3.6 million. So this, we currently allocate source protection under special projects. That may change given the legislative review that's happening right now. Our rural water quality program that Joe mentioned, the Mill Creek Ranger crew, which does it's high school students and they do work in the Mill Creek, and their work will be adjusted slightly this year in light of the recent events. So, obviously we're going to have to plan our work accordingly to ensure the safety of those students. Floodplain mapping, we receive special funding for improvements to our floodplain mapping. Emerald Ash Borer, we did get approval from the government to use our land sale reserve for additional work to address hazard trees within our watershed. We do have significant land holdings, as Joe mentioned. Updates to our water management plan are ongoing, and then we also run a number of children's water festivals. So that you can just track our per capita levy over time. And something significant, this was from 2018. In late 2017, and I'm sure this was already brought to your attention, we had to change the way that we distribute the levy. So essentially, we used to have an agreement in place that particularly with the city of Hamilton, although our board saw this regularly, we always highlighted it to our board and in our communication to all of the various councils, and it was found through a ruling that that agreement was invalid. And so we went back to the straight modified the value assessment formula for all municipalities, and that greatly increased the apportionment to the city of Hamilton, what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, it reduced the apportionment to everybody else by the same amount. So our overall levy did not increase or decrease, but it changed the apportionment. And so the city of Hamilton was not in favor of that change. So they have appealed it. They provided us with a notice of appeal for the 2018 levy apportionment, and then they have given us the same notice this year for the 2019 levy apportionment. Both are being held in abeyance pending their appeal decision, so we're still waiting for that decision. It's unknown at this point. So your 2019 levy apportionment for Puslinch is $115,793 that's mentioned there. We highlighted what the difference approximately would be. We went back to what your levy was under the agreement. And then we just approximated that up based on the general levy increase to be approximately $13,000. However, I would like to highlight that we would have to explore our legal options once we get the findings of this appeal and understand the fallout. So this is rather speculative at this point.
Excellent. Thank you for your presentation. Councilor Bulmer?
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome. Well, thank you both Mayor White or I guess today's here as a director of the member of the board, for addressing the elephant in the room, which was the flooding. It was interesting in your present papers you provided ahead of time, to characterize the issue of our time as the increased flooding, and so I'm glad you addressed right away the dollar impact of the cut in funding. It'd be about $400,000. It's interesting when I think back to the years when I worked at the Conservation Authority. When we'd roll out in the trucks in the morning, the radios were alive with what we thought was high technology at the time, when the dams from across the watershed were radioing in their water levels and the weather stations were radioing in their stuff, and that we just thought this was the greatest thing. But I know that's not how it's done anymore. So a great deal of investment has been put in, I'm sure, over the years. When you talk about this cut, or when the province talks about the 50% to flood control measures, we're not talking about, is it specific to things like, I remember a couple years ago, the Conestoga Dam needed some specific repairs? Or is it general, is it across the board, anything to do with flood control? You talked about watershed mapping or flood control mapping. Is it a global cut to anything that has to do with flood control, or specific to just the physical parts of flood control?
Through you, Mayor Sealy, that's a great question, and it's one that I can answer really clearly. Our provincial grant was called a Section 39 grant, so it was about $900,000. It's been cut back to around $450 or $460, so that's the $420,000 cut. We allocate that among a number of programs, but it's relatively arbitrary. Our full flood forecasting and warning cost is in the $3 to $4 million range, and the province doesn't pay half of it. They pay about a quarter. They used to, and now it'll go down to an eighth. So they never really did have a 50-50 cost sharing arrangement with us. So it's how it's allocated. As a staff person, I'm going to continue to recommend to the board that this is a very high priority program, and we're going to have to continue to allocate appropriate dollars to it, so that, and I believe that'll be well supported by the board. It's a critical program. You can't underfund it. And with respect to the big repairs on Conestoga Dam, that was the water and erosion control infrastructure program that we do cost share 50-50 with the province. The good news is they asked for applications for funding again this year, which was a good thing. They haven't confirmed that there's any money available, but at least we did submit anyway. And much the same way with source protection, we did do a full submission for full funding support for the program for another year. But again, they haven't confirmed that they have funding, but they didn't withhold applications anyway, which was, I think, a positive move.
Hopeful. At the very least, hopeful.
Hopeful.
Yeah, super. That's good to know. And I'm sure the people in downtown Fergus and Elora and downtown Cambridge are also pleased to know that the Conservation Authority still sees flood control as a priority.
Absolutely.
I'm glad you
Just
mentioned.
add, sorry.
Yeah.
A top priority. The board is going to, like everybody's going to be dealing with cuts as you prioritize what you're doing. You look at your core mandates, clearly flooding and safety are top of mind. So if some of that funding disappears from the province, we'll have to make adjustments elsewhere.
Yeah, and it's important we all understand that we may all have to contribute to some of that.
Well, and frankly, and I kind of alluded to it here, we don't know where this ends.
Yeah.
We don't know where we're all going to be in another year. But the priority would be, some of us, like you were mentioning before, wear a couple of hats. We're not looking at this as just a way to shuffle the taxes around. We're looking to go back to the province and try to emphasize how important these programs are. And the solution isn't to drop them onto the property tax. So we need to find ways to work our way through this. And, there's a lot of members on the board who will come from small municipalities as well, and they're very cognizant of what the hit is on the property taxpayer. So the solution here is not the property taxpayer. We're going to have to be innovative on how we approach this. But the priorities clearly will remain safety and flooding.
Super. I've been around long enough to remember when the funding was a different proportion. I think it was the province had the majority at one time when I first got along, and it's amazing how these things do fluctuate back and forth. So I'm glad you're going to be trying to push that balance. I'm glad you mentioned the Rural Water Quality Program. That's been an important thing for me for a long time. I did the environmental farm plan very early on, did a couple of projects. So I'm glad to see that's going, and I'm glad to see the money still being, because that's money spent upstream to help people downstream. So I'm glad that's still going. And I think I've got to notice it's the 20th anniversary this year as well. And there's going to be some, can you remind me, there's a special event for celebrating that program?
Don't quote me on it. I believe there's a bus tour on about the 26th of June.
Can you confirm that?
We can confirm that, though, because I know I have it in my calendar.
So the other piece you mentioned was the GRC land holdings outside of the pay-to-use parks. And we're blessed. I don't know if we're unusually blessed, but we've got lots of them here, and that make up thousands of acres. Some yours, some Halton's, some Hamilton's, some Hamilton region. And I think it's so valuable because it helps connect people to the land and connect people to things they might not otherwise see, learn about, and then value. And once they value it, they're willing to understand that they may even be willing to protect it. Just one thing, I see them as more than just recreational assets for our community, though. They create sort of a value of place for people choosing to live somewhere when they have access to those. And I also see them part of a bit of our economic development piece here, because people come from all around to make use of those, and when they're here, they discover some restaurants. We've got the Guelph Outdoor Bike Association uses the one at Puslinch. I know one of the there's a lot of riding organizations that use them. So I worked with the Conservation Authority years ago to develop, a multi-use for hunters and horseback riders and trail users at the Crawford Tract. So I know they're used by a variety of different people, both that live here and from our surrounding communities, who also contribute in their property taxes to the maintenance of them. So I'm begging for their survival if I can. If I can put in a note for them, that'd be great.
Through you, Mayor Seeley. No, I appreciate that comment, because these, the pay-for-use conservation authority areas, they can, like I said, they'll carry themselves. It's these non-revenue generating areas that there's a number of them in Puslinch Township, I agree, that don't have a really strong funding source, so they're the ones that are a challenge to manage. And the use is getting a lot higher because of the population growth. People want to spend time outside, but they weren't really meant for heavy recreational use as much as to preserve natural spaces in the landscape. So they're really important features that we want to preserve. And that's the one thing I did take out of the province's definition of core roles for conservation authorities. Now that we're attached to the Ministry of Conservation, Environment and Parks, and conservation, they changed the acronym.
Yes. It'll change next week.
But, and they do want us preserving these spaces and protecting them, and that's something that we're still trying to figure out what the province is expecting out of that. But preparing management plans for these properties is going to be really important, because we see a much higher level of conflict on them than we used to see. Conflict between hunters and walkers, dog walkers and horseback riders, bicycle riders, and, so we really want to focus on getting access to our reserves from the province so that we can prepare proper management plans. And the one we really want to tackle first is that Puslinch Track, where everyone mountain bikes right now and rides their horses.
Yeah, it's well used.
Yeah.
One last, you mentioned the ranger crew, and I just because these two are related, that organization, the Friends of Mill Creek, does have an interest in seeing that bridge returned at the Bond Tract that was burnt out by vandals several years ago, and have reached out several times to the Conservation Authority with an offer of they would like to make a contribution. They'd be willing to participate in the replacement of that bridge financially, to reconnect it so that people can make use of the walking trails in there again. I don't know if you knew that or if it's made it up through the works, but we've been, I guess at the staff level, they've been waiting to see if the thing is going to be kept or sold or not. So when considering that piece of property, there is a group here that's interested in continuing to help make it available to the public.
Through you, Mayor Seeley, we want to connect with that group. I talked to our manager this morning about that very matter, and they're still in the process of working out what to do with the passive lands. I want to be clear, there's no plan on the table to sell that particular property. It's just what we want to do for public access for it is really the question. So we want to have a conversation with them, and we'll make sure we connect.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate your presentation.
And I'll just add one thing. So when you've got a park, you've got gate revenue, right? And so the gate revenue funds the park. When you've got these properties, we don't have the funding. They're kind of sitting there, getting used almost like a park. So when you're looking at building infrastructure and so forth, that has to come out of a different pocket of money. It can't come out of the gate revenue, and that's the challenge. So you've got these passive lands that should be basically conservation that are being used a lot, and in some cases, some of these areas inside the urban areas are becoming lots of issues and problems dealing with. So we're venturing into things that the Conservation Authority hasn't faced before, and so with squeezed money and challenges, when you're looking at these properties, you absolutely want to maintain them. The question is, how do you do that? How do you fund that? Added garbage pickup, there's lots going on, right? So they're a real challenge, but we recognize the value to the community, so.
Thank you.
Councilor Goyda?
Thank you. Thanks very much for coming today to speak to us. My question is perhaps a little bit less related to the budget and more just a general question. Right now, as we speak, there's flooding happening all through Ontario, cottage country, Quebec, New Brunswick, and people are being evacuated from their homes. The Army's getting called in. But it seems like, and it may not be true, but it seems like these kind of events are happening more often. The weather is, these weather events are increasing in intensity and the amount that they're happening. And it seems like we hear all the time record rainfall and record snowfall and record water levels, record this, record that. We're breaking these records all the time, excuse me. And in your presentation, you talk about the issue of our time being climate change. And that brings also with it things like drought and ice storms and all these other things. And I know that there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into flood forecasting and the modeling and all the things that you're doing. But I can only imagine that this climate change and these weather events must be a huge challenge. So how do you, I guess, predict, prepare, adapt to these weather events that seem to be breaking records all the time? Can data from previous years and current years be used to forecast what kind of records we're going to be breaking 10, 20 years down the road? Because I'm sure that you're having to kind of plan out long term like that. And I just struggle with grasping how you do that when you don't really know what's going to happen with the weather.
Again, through you, Mayor Sealy, that's a really good question, and I would say things are changing, and some of it's actually counterintuitive. The last 2 years in a row, we've had major ice jam problems in the city of Cambridge down through Brantford, which doesn't seem normal in a winter like we just had with not really that much snow, but again, it was a result of just some cold temperatures, and we weren't able to get a layer of ice on the river, so it was exposed to the air, and we got a really big jamming problem in Cambridge, which resulted in a major potential flood downstream. In terms of managing that material, it's really hard to predict what's going to happen in 10, 15, 20 years. The most important thing I can say is that monitoring on a day-to-day basis, real-time data is the most critical thing, and having people in place that have made decisions based on what we're seeing. And so our Councillor Balmer mentioned the difference in technology that we've applied over the last several years. And so real-time access to data on river levels, on reservoir levels, are the tools that we use for making decisions on managing them. It's getting more complicated because of the climate change, but our tools are getting better. So I would say we're still in a good position. We have no control over these extreme events like are happening out in the Ottawa River, but we're a much smaller system, so we can manage it. But again, having good access to data is absolute key, and having people that are trained to make decisions once they actually get that data. And we have a wealth of experience at the senior level, and they're kind of drifting out. So one of my real concerns is making sure we have the next generation trained to manage these floods.
Yeah. There was a point in your presentation that talks about changing demographics contributing to increased management costs and pressures. And I'm curious, is that, when you say changing demographics, is that strictly just the amount of people, or is there something else when you say demographics changing that contributes to increased cost?
Certainly, it's mostly the number of people and the people that want to actually spend their time outside doing recreation things on a property. So mostly volume.
Okay. And lastly, it's exciting to hear that you're almost at your target funding levels for the new Guelph Lake Nature Center. I think the outdoor education component is extremely important, especially in this day and age where everyone's bombarded with cell phones and things like that. What will happen to the old nature, like the existing nature center, I should say, when this new facility opens up?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I expect that property will be demolished. It's pretty much completely
Okay.
depreciated, and so there'll be a little parking lot there so folks can still access their rotary forest across the way. That's sort of our preliminary thinking, but we're planning to move the new nature center right within the park so that we can do some interpretive programming within the park as well and sort of double duty the nature center rather than just have kids there. Maybe it'll be something that we can use to attract customers on the weekend who campers sometimes want to learn a little bit about nature as well. So we're hoping we can attract that kind of crowd too.
Good. Thank you.
Councillor Spoulos?
Yes, thank you very much for coming. From my experience, you have a top-notch organization, and it's good to have people like you around doing this kind of work for us. My question, a couple of questions. First relates to the budget. You mentioned that we're having a $400,000 reduction from the province and budget. And you sort of hinted as if you're going to get some more reductions. Is that correct, or is that it?
We don't know. This is what's come out in this budget, right? So as the province moves forward on its work against the deficit, things may change. This is what we know to date. This is very specific. Other than that, they're fairly tight-lipped, and I don't foresee anything. Obviously, this budget is set, but there's always a risk going forward depending on what goes on. However, in some cases, as I said earlier, sometimes you can turn the tide. They've made some announcements that they've stepped back from once there's a little more information out there. So we'll be battling all the way along. There's meetings. We have a full Queen's Park Day that GRCA goes down and meets with all the ministers and stuff. So we'll be in the forefront of ensuring that the important programs are funded. Will it be future cutbacks? That I could ask you the same municipally. We don't know.
No, I thought for this budget year.
No, this is it.
This is it. Okay, that's good.
Unless anything could happen, right?
I realize that. I know it's a poker game.
I-
yeah.
Through you, Mayor Sealy, I'll add a little bit to that is that, again, we don't know about source protection yet or the water and erosion control infrastructure. The two things that we have been really, or one thing that we've really focused on over the last 10 years is to build appropriate reserves to deal with this kind of matter. So if we're not successful in having water and erosion control infrastructure funding from the province, we do have sufficient reserves to do the projects we have planned this year. We've been very careful about setting money aside because we know you own $1 billion worth of large dams and dikes, eventually you're going to get hit with a big repair, and we wanted to have something in reserves so that we could handle sudden repairs without all of a sudden going straight back to the municipalities with a big levy.
Okay, the last question I have is the jet fuel spill. I understand you've been doing some testing on the water around your properties. Have any conclusions you've come up with?
Again, we're not specifically doing testing. That's a Ministry of Environment responsibility, and I understand that gets charged back to the people that spilled it. But there is testing going on at the Shades Mills Reservoir. We did cancel ice fishing this winter because we weren't certain about the water quality and how the fish might be affected. I understand they're actually out trapping fish and taking water samples. And so far, the news appears positive. I understand you would have received some correspondence as well. That's pretty much the same correspondence we get from MECP about the status. They don't seem to be smelling jet fuel at either end of the reservoir now, so that's a good sign. Their water quality samples are coming back without high contaminants. So again, we're waiting a final report on any of the fish toxicology.
Whether your information collaborates with what they've said to date, that's basically.
We're getting the same information from them.
No, I mean, your testing of Shades Mill collaborates with what they're saying.
No, we're not specifically doing testing. It's actually the ministry that's doing it. No, do we have the ministry out doing that?
Is that right?
Yeah, we're
Okay.
getting the same results.
Oh,
We
I see.
feel it's,
I see. I thought it was you people were doing the testing at Shades Mill. You're dropping the water levels and all that sort of thing.
no, we're cooperating with them. If they want the water levels adjusted,
I
we're
see.
happy to help
Okay.
them.
Gotcha.
But we want them doing the testing so it's a consistent result.
Okay, that makes sense then. Great. Thank you very much.
Councillor Roth?
Thank you very much. The 48% budget cut from the province, it's definitely going to be prioritization methods have to be put in place, and I think we're all faced with this, like you said, Mr. White. And I'm glad to hear that you're willing to do that, and maybe with all the publicity from the flooding east and north of us, maybe they'll take a look at it rather than a photo op to maybe really do something and help us out with this. So, I mean, every level of government has to realize how important the job is that you're doing, and all conservation authorities. So hopefully they'll backtrack a bit on this. But if not, it sounds like you're willing to take on the challenge. So, thank you.
And again, it'll be the same as municipalities and the rest of us, as you give a suite of services, you give a whole series of services at a municipal level, and at the end of the day, you may be reviewing some of those, and the GRC may be in the same place. I'm not even remotely suggesting we're at that stage, but there are some things that may not be core that are important, but as your money disappears, you start to prioritize where they're going to fall, and it's going to be the same for municipalities. So in an ideal world, you'll maintain and continue the funding, but as I say, we've got excellent staff at the GRCA. They do a very good job on the budget, and we'll be trying to figure out how we're going to be dealing with this initial $400,000. And going forward, I mean, the die is cast here. We know what we're looking for going forward, so we'll be looking at that. And again, it's the same as we're going to be facing here municipally. If at the end of the day you've got X amount of dollars to spend, you have to look at what services you're providing, and you may have to begin to scale some of those back. The taxpayer can only support so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation. It's obvious to me that we do have great staff at the helm, and you're on point, and you're gonna try to get this funding restored. We will adapt as needed. My one concern is we're talking about these user spaces that they're not pay per use, and the last thing I want to see is a gate across it, no trespassing. We have plenty of those that are giant lakes in this township, and nobody can access them. And I'm not saying that that's the initiative, but I personally, and this is a little embarrassing, being a resident of the township my entire life, just visited the Crawford track for the first time. I took my I knew it existed, I just had never bothered to go for a walk. And I took my family out there. We had, is it 100 acres?
It's in that range.
I had the 100 acres to myself with my family. And I live in Morrison, so I have a little quarter acre, and it was fantastic. We primarily kept to the trails, cognizant of not trying to, do more damage. But I think that's an amazing opportunity for our residents, and I'd like to see that maintained.
Certainly, our goal is appropriate use of these properties, not no use.
So again, thank you for your presentation. We really appreciate it. Moved by Councillor Ballmer, seconded by Councillor Roth. The council receives a presentation by the Grand River Conservation Authority with respect to their budget. All in favor? Carried.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure, Mayor White. All right, I will invite our last delegation down. Hamilton Conservation Authority budget presentation. Welcome. You may begin whenever you're ready.
First, we'll play musical chairs. And
Just try to speak into the microphone if you're going to address. I'll ask. Thank you.
everyone hear me okay? All right. Well, thank you, Mayor Searley and members of Puslinch Council for having HCA in this afternoon to speak to you about our 2019 operating budget. We're going to make a three-person presentation today. I'm Lisa Burnside. I'm the CAO. I was happy to be out for the last 2 years. We have Deputy CAO Scott Peck here. He's also the Director of our Watershed Planning and Engineering, and he's going to speak to some of our technical projects. And I have our Secretary Treasurer Neil McDougall here, and he's going to speak to all the numbers and financials. Unfortunately, the one person we don't have here today is our Puslinch representative and our acting chair, Susan Fielding. Unfortunately, due to a medical situation, she's not able to join us today, but I do believe she may have sent out an email very early this morning from the hospital, and she does very much support our programs and our services and our budget, and is very supportive of staff, and we're very pleased to have her as chair. Before I get started, Grand River kind of already touched on a number of things that I wanted to touch on in our opening remarks. We too were hit by that Section 39 funding cut. So we lost about $85,000 with that. We also lost about another $4,000 in we get some staff funding that helps with some of our monitoring. So we're looking at about a $90,000 impact. That, since our budget is already set for the year, that also represents a deficit for us that we will also have to make up by the end of the year, looking at our programmings, our programs and services, if we can rejuggle a bit for priorities for this year, and potentially dipping into our reserves. We have not always had the ability to have reserves at HCA. As you know, we're majorly funded by the City of Hamilton. They've had considerable constraints over the past decade. But for the past 2 years, we've had some very favorable summer weather and positive returns for our conservation areas. So that afforded us the opportunity to put some money in reserves. Of course, we thought that was to cushion for a poor operating season, because at some point we will be hit with poor summer weather rather than shielding us from cuts to grant programs. But thankfully, we do have those. But to get us started, I thought I would just show a map of all the conservation authorities in Ontario to put it in perspective. Some of you may be familiar with this, but there are 36 conservation authorities in Ontario. There's some patches, though, where there are no conservation authorities, particularly in the north, but also in the Muskoka area right now where there's some flooding. But I kind of put a little box around Hamilton because we're not the largest conservation authority, much smaller than the Grand River. We're small, but we like to say we're very impactful. We're small but mighty. So our watershed, we have just 2 participating municipalities. We have the City of Hamilton and the Township of Puslinch. So our creeks flow into Hamilton Harbour and Lake Ontario. So the Spencer, and of course Puslinch is the home to the headwaters of the Spencer Creek. Spencer, Boer, Shadoke, and Red Hill flow directly to the harbour. And then out Stody Creekway, we've got Battlefield, Stony, and the numbered water courses, and they flow directly into Lake Ontario. We have very diverse land holdings. We own or manage just over 11,000 acres. We own 10% of our watershed, and that's pretty significant. And so they're very diverse. Some of them, the land holdings are locally, provincially, and even some cases internationally significant with our forests, prairies, wetlands, watercourses, karsts, and Lake Ontario shoreline, and of course Niagara Escarpment. Very much, we are known for our recreation and outdoor opportunities for the residents of Hamilton and Puslinch and beyond. We have 6 major conservation areas. We've got extensive trails, about 140 kilometers of trails with our kind of our crown jewel in the Dundas Valley. We have about 300 campsites. We have waterfalls, and sometimes it's exciting and sometimes that's a challenge, and I'll touch on that. We've got recreational lakes for swimming. We've got our boat rentals, fishing. We have a little unique for a conservation authority. We have a 340-slip marina at 50 Point, and we also have an historical village. And recreation really is a key contributor for our self-generated revenues, and Neil will kind of touch on our breakdown. We also have a new strategic plan. It must be strategic planning time for a lot of organizations. So we too did some extensive consultation with the public. We did a online survey. We received over 500 responses. We had 3 public open houses. We had one at Valens Community Centre nearby here to Puslinch, and we did one in Dundas. We worked with our board and we worked with all staff. So we put in place a new strategic plan for 2019. Did result in a new vision and mission as well. And we've really kind of simplified so we all could remember what the vision and mission is. The vision, if we could do everything we want to achieve, it's a healthy watershed for everyone. And our mission is to lead in the conservation of our watershed and connect people to nature. It has 5 priority areas. These actually remain the same from our previous plan and very similar to what you just heard from the Grand River. We've got an education and environmental awareness component, our conservation area experience, our organizational excellence, our natural heritage conservation, and our water management. And we have put organizational excellence right in the middle of all that because we feel it is a key objective that we have to be a well-run, well-managed, and financially stable organization to do all of our other program areas well. So about those waterfalls. Their popularity and promotion through social media all through the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area and beyond does continue. And keeping visitors safe is a priority. So we keep looking at our visitor management, our fencing, our signage, our trail linkages, smart trail linkages to get people where they want to go, but to keep them safe. You're seeing a picture here of Webster Falls and Two Falls, probably 2 of our most popular. our shuttle bus service for Spencer Gorge. It was piloted 2 years ago, and it first was off-site with a third-party private organization, Think Greensville. We then brought it over to Christie Lake to give it a try there at one of our own land holdings, and with that experience, we now have the confidence to run it as an ongoing part of our operations out of Christie Lake. So our advisory board and our board of directors did approve that now become a permanent part of our ongoing operations. And so what we've been finding so far are stats or visitor numbers, roughly 16,000 cars parked off-site. So that's roughly about 48,000 visitors that use the shuttle, and that number's been pretty steady over the past 2 years, very influenced by weather, of course. And our partnership and collaboration with municipal bylaw enforcement with the City of Hamilton is key to make sure people park in the right areas and don't clog up small towns and communities. You also heard from the Grand River the importance of master planning for all of our areas to make sure we've got directions and plans on how to keep all of our areas up to date, safe, and current. So we have approved a 10-year master planning process at our authority to make sure all of our guiding documents for all of our areas will be updated over the next decade. So Westfield, quite close by, was just completed in 2018 with the addition of the acquisition of additional lands we have there. Westfield Heritage Village will now be known as Westfield Heritage Village Conservation Area. So we will be looking to put in place a complete trail system behind the existing village and providing a full experience there. Valens Lake is going to be underway for 2019, and that will include management plans for Fletcher Creek Ecological Preserve, which of course is here in Puss Lynch, and we'll be looking at parts of the Beverly Swamp and also the Lafarge Trail as well. Something new that we're looking at implementing, fingers crossed, it's a lot of work to get permits, is roof camping or glamping at Valens Lake. This will be a new foray for us. Of course, we already offer extensive camping, tent camping, or to bring in your RV to the site, but imagine if you can enjoy all the beauty and nature of a conservation area without having to bring much gear or sleep in a tent. So these have already been very popularized at provincial and national parks, and we believe we're the first conservation authority that will be looking to provide a similar experience. With that, I'm going to pass things over to Scott to talk a little bit about some of the interesting and exciting initiatives we were able to do last year and over this year.
Thank you. This first project that we've done is within the town of Dundas, and it's along the Spencer Creek system, really between Thorpe Street and Coots Drive, essentially just below where McMaster University is. This watercourse, you can see it here is the on the left-hand side. The watercourse used to be very straight with not a lot in the way of fish habitat, and there were salmon that swim up through this area, but not a lot of other work. So with some direction and then through our monitoring work that we've done as part of our overall program, we maintain the watercourse in its existing channel area, but what we did is we instituted some specific fish habitat improvement projects to try to not only encourage the salmon to be there, but the walleye and other type of species. In Hamilton Harbor, the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry has been stocking walleye. If you are a hunter or a fisher and you get the OFAH magazine, it's one of the highlighted places in Ontario to go walleye fishing now. And what we're trying to do is to make that so it's a self-sustaining fishery, so that the walleye swim from Hamilton Harbor up through Coots Paradise and into Spencer Creek. And this habitat work relates specifically to that. The exciting thing about this is just in this picture, when, to quote the movie, if we build it, they will come. And this is a picture actually just after construction of the fish habitat structures were put in place. And we put in cobble and rock and some lunkers along the shore to provide that habitat. But when we went out there the day after the construction of the whole project had been done, you could see a great big black cloud in the water. And at first you weren't sure what it was, but it was fish that had come up there almost immediately to start taking advantage of the habitat. And our aquatic ecologist brought his GoPro to work and put it in the water. And you can see there's some invasive species within that. The fish at the top with the orange fins, those are rudd. But you can also see others such as some of the perch in the bottom that have come up in through there. And there were a lot of fish that had come. One of our major projects that we're working on, and this is in the upper area of Stony and Battlefield Creek above the escarpment, and really this is one of, as I've said, our main projects, but it looks to create wetlands on the land, on properties that we have acquired, in an effort to hold back water above the escarpment to address flooding and erosion issues below the escarpment. Essentially, using those rural areas to establish and reestablish wetlands to hold back that water to address the flooding and erosion down in the urban area of Stony Creek. You know, in areas where back when the area is developed, they didn't have regard for stormwater management. They didn't have regard for the natural processes. And what we're trying to do is essentially trying to use those processes to solve some of the problems. As I've said, this is our flagship, our watershed project. And from this perspective, this project and really the ownership and management of our conservation lands are some of our best tools in addressing the challenges of climate change. We also work with our stewardship program throughout our watershed, both from a rural and an urban perspective of doing restoration efforts. And these are just a couple of examples of working with school kids and working with adjacent landowners for restoration projects to, again, restore some of those natural features within our watershed. And we also have been working, we have a grant program in place where we have $20,000 available to our area residents through our stewardship program to look at doing any number of stewardship projects. But what we're really focusing in on is site-specific stormwater management, so rain gardens, garden swales, that sort of thing, to try to address some of the stormwater issues on site, to address some of the downstream erosion and water quality issues that we have. So with that, I'll turn it over to Neil for the...
Thank you, Scott. So our budget, as mentioned by the Grand, and there will be a lot of repetition because we're in the same line of business, our budget has been set, and this is when we start off in our budget process. These are the three goals that we live by. One is to support our Conservation Authorities Act mandate. Second is to operate on a cash neutral or positive basis. And the third is to not stray outside of the levy increase recommended by, in our case, because we're 99.4% Hamilton, by their dictate. So, and basically that has kept us within 1.5% to 0% over the last 8-9 years. So we have learned how to live with an austerity budget, and as Lisa had mentioned, we've had a couple of very good years the last couple of years from a weather standpoint, which really helps with the camping, helps keep the marina active, and helps with the day admissions. So we've been able to build up some sort of reserves, because we don't have a formal reserve policy. When we put our budget together, it's on a break-even, assuming a normal weather basis. So when there is some upside, you know, we are able to put some away, which, as it turns out, has been very fortuitous given the rainy days that have come, but not from the weather. Our revenues, self-generated commercial sales are a big part of our business, and again, that's something that puts us in better stead than a lot of the other conservation areas, because we are self-sufficient at the conservation areas, and they do generate positive funds for us. We also have a very active foundation, which has been contributing to our education fund of late, which has been very helpful. We have received federal and provincial grants. And the way we structure our business is that if we have a project, we apply for the grant. If we get the grant, that's when we staff up through contract or seasonal or contract help. We don't have people on staff to do that, and then if the grant doesn't come through, look to find work for them. We're a very lean organization. That allows us to, when we do get something coming through grants, we're able to ramp up and we get the work done. If it's not there, we're not jeopardizing one of our first goals of being cash neutral or positive. Municipal levy is similar to the grant. It's about a third of our total funds. On the expense side, major expenses, salaries and wages, because we're not a manufacturing operation. We have no cost of goods sold. We're a service business. We're a people business. And we have repayment of loan. We had, up until last year, we had 3 loans where we had borrowed money from the city to reline the marina wall, which was necessary to keep that business open. We acquired originally it was the Veldhuis property in Dundas. We call it Canal Park now. And then we went from a defined benefit pension plan to a defined contribution pension plan. And when we did that initial buyout, it was more expensive than we could handle through operations. So again, we had borrowed some funds. And as it turns out, the timing is good because those loans are coming to an end just when we need to free up some money. So this is going to work well for us as well. Levy increase this year that we're asking for is 1.5%, same as last year. That translates into $65,000 in total for us. So that 1.5%, it's great to have, but it's not huge. It's not as much as what the province just took away from us, but it's still a manageable amount, hopefully manageable for you. You can see that it's split 99.4% to Hamilton, 0.6% to you. Now, we're the one guys that come here a reverse of the other ones, and we can't tell you that we're saving your money. We're actually costing you more because it used to be 99.7% Hamilton, 0.3% Pushlands. So it's around $15,000 extra coming from us, but you save that from grants, so there shouldn't be a problem in that. It's just a pass-through. Now, the levy use, conservation areas, they do not get any funding. Westfield Village, we just took that on in 2016. When we made the deal with the city to take on ownership, we also got the commitment that the funding that they provided would continue. None of the $28,000 that you folks give us goes to Westfield. It goes to the core of the WP&E and corporate support. So that's how that's allocated. So I don't want you to think that you had to pay for something that was ways away. So a total of 4.4 compared to the 4.4 as far as the levy is concerned. On the revenue, you can see our camping's $1 million, the marina's $1 million, the day admissions $2 million. The equipment that's an internal transfer. We run a central fleet, so we charge the conservation areas for use of all of the the pickups and lawnmowers and everything like that, and manage the fleet centrally. So that's what the equipment represents. Fees, half of those fees are the permit fees and other fees that our watershed planning people charge, and the other half is a fee that we receive for managing Confederation Beach Park, the big park and Wild Waterworks. It's owned by the city of Hamilton, but it's managed by us, and we charge a management fee based on 15% of their expenses, so that generates additional cash for us. And then the other is all the other donations and grants and everything else I had mentioned earlier. Now this year, we didn't put in place much of a change in the admission fee because we did a major increase last year, coinciding with the major increase in the minimum wage. We wanted to marry the two, so we weren't sure if that would be reflected in lower use, but as it turned out, it didn't. People still came out, and where we used to charge $10 for a car and driver plus $5 per extra person, we charged $10 for the car and $5 for each person, so if you came by yourself, you saw a 33% increase, but, you know, usually it's a family of 4, and they were still quite happy to come and use the facilities that we have at that rate. Our expense highlights, as I mentioned before, our staffing, it's stable, it's lean, and the way we operate, it allows us to continue that way. And there's no major change in our operations as far as, at this point, we haven't staffed up because we've taken on other land holdings. That may happen once Scott gets the whole Salt Fleet Conservation Area built up, then it'll probably require additional resources. And I say we don't really, we're not experiencing any inflation pressures right now. But when I wrote this, that was before all the gas taxes came on, so, you know, that I might re-script that down. The loan payment, as you see, just over 200,000. And one of the things that's helped us in the last couple of years is that one loan was paid off, so that was worth $100,000 to us. That allowed us to keep doing everything that we're doing, increase, you know, our average wages are going up 3%, and if you have an $8 million, that's $240,000. You take the $65,000 that we get from the levy increase, that leaves a gap. So part of that gap has been by the fact that we don't have to pay that other loan, and these next 2 loans will be coming off in 2020 and 2021. That'll help us for supplementing the projects that may get impacted if the province decides to back away from additional work that we would have relied on them. So, summarize, basically, we're looking to do the fish habit improvements. We're really excited about the Salt Fleet development that's under design right now. Our education program is very healthy. We just signed a new long-term contract with the Hamilton Wentworth School Board, and we're in the process of updating all the master plans over a period of, 6 to 8 years, but we're looking at them all to update them. And we're meeting our expenses with the revenues that are available to us and intend to do so going forward.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Councillor Bulmer?
Thank you. Good afternoon. One question that you touched on was this roof camping or glamping. I think, if I understood correctly from what you said ahead of time, is that something to do with cabins, or is it like renting a cottage you can do at Valence now?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, so they will be a roofed accommodation, so like a cabin with some bunk beds in it.
Oh.
And our hope, if we can get all the permits in place, is that these also would have a toilet and sink for you as well, and a separate little barbecue area that everyone can enjoy, barbecue pavilion.
It is glamping. When I think about the Y camp I went to that had bunk beds and a roof, we wouldn't describe it as glamorous camping. It was mosquito-ridden, but still, that sounds very nice. It's amazing how far Valence has come. When I first went as a kid, it was this odd lake in the middle of a farm field, and I couldn't figure out how it got there. I was too young to understand the whole process, and when I took my son back there, it had really developed into something that had grown into itself, I guess is the best way to put it. So I guess this is the next step. Do you have any idea of what would a cabin like that cost for a weekend? Got that far yet?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Mayor, we'll be looking at kind of what the market rate is, but if you look at any of the provincial or national parks, depending on, how glamorous it is, you're probably looking at about $120 to $150 per night.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for coming today. I don't have really too many questions. I just wanted to say thank you for all the great work you're doing. There's a lot of successful projects. It's nice to see the shuttle buses success and the fish habitat. And I know Susan Fielding couldn't be here today, but she always speaks very highly and talks about the great staff at the conservation. So thank you for all that. And I wish you the best with this glamping, because it's definitely it would be the way I would go for sure. So.
Okay, Councillor Spoulos?
Yes, thank you for coming. To applaud you for what you're doing, all the good work you're doing for all the people that are coming through your facility. My questions are financial. You said that You're facing a $90,000 hit, and it's going to take out a reserves. What sort of reserve do you have dollar-wise?
Actually, like free reserves, we have in the neighborhood of $1 million that can be apportioned to something like that. And we have other, like we have set aside reserves for heavy equipment replacement. Now, that was $800,000, and I used $300,000 in the first quarter replacing the marine lift down at 50 Point. But there's nothing else earmarked for this year, so if need be, then we could tap into that and make sure that everything is done that needs to be done, which, you know, we assure you that will be the case, and there was never any question about that, so.
Well, I wish you all the best in this new season, and wish you get well to Susan for us.
Yeah. Councilor Rowe?
Yes, thank you. I have no questions. Keep up the good work.
Thank you for your presentation. I understand, we're a small contributor to the Hamilton Conservation, but I appreciate you coming up and being a delegation. I want to give you an experience I had with your staff. This is prior to my being elected. My family owns property along the Lafarge Trail, and, we're having a bit of an issue, and I reached out, and I was kind of already had my backup waiting to hear no, 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 and it was the best experience I've had dealing with an organization. It was Gord. Is it Costi? And he was fantastic. I still have to do a follow-up with him, but it was a very pleasurable experience, and it just says kudos about how well you're running your organization. So again, I thank you. And the swamp in there, I went for a walk the other day. It is full. The water is up to the board, like to the walkway. So I like your idea of creating wetlands to retain some water to help with flood control. I think that's a brilliant. I wish you all the best in that. Okay. Thank you. Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Ballmer. The council receives a presentation by Hamilton Conservation Authority with respect to their budget. All in favor? Carried. Okay, so I think we're going to go back to intergovernmental affairs.
County staff's here,
Oh.
and so are consultants. Would it be okay if we went to the
Absolutely.
site plan control bylaw first?
Okay, so we will go to the site plan control bylaw and. we'll
Curtis,
invite them.
yep.
Okay. on down.
Come on down, Curtis.
Welcome back.
Hi.
It's okay. Whenever you're ready, just, the floor is yours. And I apologize for my sniffles. I'm not feeling 100%.
Thank you, Mayor Seeley and councillors. You're probably wondering who's this new guy here before you. So I'm Curtis Marshall, and I've taken over as the manager of development planning from Sarah. So as you know, Sarah Wilhelm is now the manager of policy planning. So I'm not totally new to the county. I've been up north for the last 2 years working with the northern townships with Linda Redmond. So now probably a few weeks ago, a month ago, I've transitioned down here to help out in the south. So I'm looking forward to working and assisting your township and working with your staff and your residents. So, anyways, so I'm here today to talk about and present a final updated site plan control bylaw here for the township. So council may remember back a couple years ago, in 2017, a review was undertaken to the township site plan control bylaw. And at the time, the township was also reviewing the building bylaw and the fee bylaw. So the current site plan control bylaw in effect in the town dates back to 2008. And from what I understand, the review was taken with the intent to provide staff with further discretion and flexibility when to apply site plan control, and with the goal of economic development and providing efficient development approvals in the township. So site plan control is a tool available under the Planning Act, and this allows municipalities to review and approve the layout and design of a proposed development. So site plan control ensures that the township that when there is new development on a site, that the township standards are met, and that the development is orderly, attractive, and compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. Township staff had prepared a previous report to council in August of 2017, and a public meeting was held in September of that year to provide information to residents or any property owners. And as I understand, there was no comments provided at the meeting from members, residents in attendance. So as part of my report, I have attached the public meeting minutes as well for your reference. So where that brings us to is county staff have assisted the township and prepared a final draft of a new site plan control bylaw, or I guess I should say an updated site plan control bylaw. And just briefly, just to give you an idea here, we've made a few key changes to the township bylaw. And just to summarize those, that we've updated some of the exemptions from site plan control. So those would be the types of development where site plan control is not required. We've also included a delegation of the approval to staff, and that would include delegating the approval of the signing of the site plan agreement. Currently, that comes to council each time there is a site plan agreement to be approved. The bylaw does, I should note, include a mechanism that allows when there are site plans that are, I'll call major developments, or there's site plans that are contentious in the community, they can be brought to council for council's consideration. And also we've added a clause that would allow for minor changes. Minor changes can be made to an approved site plan by staff. So just to summarize, we have attached an updated draft bylaw here for you to consider, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Bulmer.
Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to sunny South. Note 3, I guess, or item 3 on the thing talks about things that are exempt, different things that are exempt from the site plan control process. And the language of the exemption has me a little baffled. It talks about the following are exempt from site plan control without the approval of plans or drawings. I don't understand what that means.
Through the mayor to the councillor. So under the Planning Act, Planning Act clearly defines that a township can, or a municipality can require plans and drawings. And so that's speaking to that language that the township, in this case, doesn't require specific plans or drawings for these types of developments that then would be approved.
But this is the exemption. That's what I'm talking about. This is the following would be exempt without the. It suggests that if you're exempt, you don't have to provide plans and drawings.
Yes.
3. But if you were, then if I read that and then I came in and to get a building permit, they'd still want plans and drawings, wouldn't they?
Madam CEO would like to address.
Maybe I can help. Actually, and Curtis might be able to just confirm it. But Councillor Bulmer, that wording actually I think is taken directly from the legislation itself, and I can see how you could interpret it the way that you've indicated. But I think it's to be read in totality, that you're not subject to the site plan control. Therefore,
Yes.
You're not required to submit the approved plan. Drawings
site
and
plan
plans,
control.
yeah. So it's taken right from the act. I can see how it can be confusing, but the intent is that you are exempt from site plan control, period.
I understand that was the intent. That's what I'm trying to point out is perhaps
Yeah.
it could be reworded so that so you don't have to provide, because you're exempt, you don't have to provide plans and drawings for site plan, for approval, for a site plan approval. It's just maybe I'm a niggly thing on that, but it stuck out as it didn't make sense.
Well, what we could do is we could double check the legislation, and if council's fine, if the legislation isn't specifically worded that way, we will change it. But if it is, I would suggest that we just
Leave it.
stay with the course the way it is outlined
Okay.
in the Planning Act.
As long as staff understands it, I guess, and can explain it if
Yep.
it ever comes up. Under 3C, it talks about agriculture and farm-related structures being exempt unless they're commercial or industrial or farm-related use that serves the public, or farm tourism use that serves the public. Our new zoning bylaw permits, as of right, I believe, a certain amount of commercial activity in a farm building. So how does this work? How does this get triggered if it's an as-of-right use, no one's needs a building permit to, I'm trying to figure out how this connects for an as-of-right use.
Through the mayor. So it would be caught in situations where there is a building permit required. So if there was a home industry and they were building an addition for a shop, welding shop, or had an apple farm with a small store, that sort of thing, and they required a building permit, that's when that would be triggered.
Okay, good. So it doesn't need to be, residents wouldn't need to be worried that just because they start one of these or put a fruit stand on their property, they're going to have to get a site plan approval. Super. Would a horse show be considered farm-related tourism?
Through the mayor, I guess that's something I haven't put thought to at this point. Yeah, how I guess it would depend on the scope and scale of a show and whether or not it was a facility or not, or if it's a one-off thing that the farmer held as an event.
Because it's an important part of our community. A lot of these, places that have boarding stables will have maybe once a year we'll have a horse show at their barn, and then a barn in another community will have one at theirs, and they kind of go back and forth. And I'd hate to see that get caught up in it, but there does have members of the public coming. Is there a way we can I guess I'd hate to see these get caught up, the little ones. I can understand the need for something that maybe what our neighbors dealt with at Angelstone perhaps was different.
Yeah, I mean, if I could speak to that briefly, the mayor. So that exemption for agricultural buildings and structures is carried forward from the existing bylaw, so I wouldn't expect that would see a change in how that's being administered.
Right, but we've got this extra thing about farm tourism. So something like Stroms would be considered farm tourism if it were here. It's not in our community, but I guess because they have a corn maze, those sorts of things are considered farm-related tourism?
Through the mayor, that's my understanding. That would be the intent, yes.
Even though there's no buildings involved?
Yeah, again, through the mayor, I think it would depend on the specific circumstance. If the building department reviewed the application and there was building permits was required for structures or other things, that's when site plan would be triggered.
Okay, that's great. You've made excellent clarifications there. That the requirement for any of this would be triggered by an application for a building permit. So if the use is a permitted use but doesn't require a building permit, such as a corn maze, it wouldn't. If the building was being built specifically, say for a pancake house was being built where someone had a maple sugar operation, that might trigger a site plan control plan on a farm. Through the mayor. So it does. I guess there are cases where there are change of use permits needed by the building department. So there may not be a physical change to the building, but if it's a change of use, that also could. I should clarify. I would understand that site plan could be required then, because accessible parking requirements could change, loading. Storage, those sorts of things. So generally, when there's an interaction with the building department, there would be an analysis done that whether or not it substantially changes usability of the building or structure, or there's a building permit. And I should clarify, there's also been some exemptions. The idea of exemptions for some commercial, institutional, industrial uses has been carried forward from the current bylaw. The current bylaw speaks to a dollar amount of $10,000 when there's work being done, that any project that's small scale under, say, a $10,000 threshold could be exempted from site plan. So that's been updated now to not speak to the cost, but actually to speak to a size. Right.
So for commercial and institutional structures, if you're given 1,000 square feet of a buffer, that if you're doing a small addition or a small accessory building, you wouldn't need site plan approval. And then similarly for industrial uses, that would be 2,000 square feet. And there is language that provides the opportunity for the chief building official or the development and legislative coordinator to make an exemption when there's other minor changes that maybe don't quite fit that pattern.
That was my only concern. I'm not trying to figure out what triggers these things, and so you've helped me figure that out. I guess it's implied in there since it's development related, so thank you very much.
Councillor Gordon?
Thank you. I have no questions.
Councillor Spoulos?
Thank you. I thought it was pretty clear. Thank you.
Councillor Rowe?
Thank you, I have no question.
Wow, you got off easy. I have no questions as well. It was a great presentation. Thank you for your help.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Moved by Councillor Ballmer, seconded by Councillor Rowe. The council receives the Wellington County Planning Report with respect to the site plan control bylaw update. The council passed the bylaw to establish a site plan control area to define classes of development and to delegate council authority pursuant to Section 41 of the Planning Act, RSO 1990 CP13 as amended, and to repeal bylaw 16/08. All in favor? Carried. Okay. We will now ask for
Amanda Pepe,
Yeah.
from GM Blue.
GM Blue to come down into the hot seat. You and whenever you're ready.
Okay. Thank you. For those I haven't met yet, Amanda Pepping with GM Blue Plan. I've been working, I guess, with the Township Development Review Team for about 6 years now. My right here is Steve Conway, who's also been working with the township for a number of years. How many? 30 plus years. So he's got a lot of history in the township as well. And then Stan, to my left here from Hardin Environmental. How long have you been?
25 years.
25 years, there we go. So our team's been working to do an update to the municipal development standards. So I was asked just to give a kind of a brief walkthrough of kind of the updates that we've made to the previous version. So the previous version of the servicing standards were last updated in 1999, so they were quite due for an update. The previous version was primarily geared towards subdivision developments. It didn't really touch on site plans, zoning applications, that sort of thing. They were quite out of date. They didn't reflect a lot of kind of procedural and policy changes that had happened over time and didn't reflect current industry best practices and material and design innovations. So our objectives for the update, to develop a comprehensive manual that could be used for all land development applications within the township. So as I said, not just subdivisions, but also zoning bylaws and site plans, to be updated to reflect the numerous policy and procedure changes that had happened over the years, to be consistent with the township's goals, objectives, and level of service policies. The document was intended to be, what I said, outcome-based and to encourage innovation. So basically what I mean by that is that we tried not to be overly prescriptive. So we didn't, the documents basically provide the objectives and guidelines. We don't tell people what to build or how to build them, but just what targets and objectives to achieve. And the intent was to leverage existing available regulatory guidelines, design manuals, to avoid kind of repeating information that was already well documented in other places. So examples of that would be the MECP design guidelines, Ontario provincial specifications, that sort of thing. And we had obtained a lot of input from various other organizations during the update, township staff, GWS Ecological, Hardin Environmental, and staff from the county planning department as well. So the new document structure looks a little different from the old version. So basically, we've opened the document with kind of a brief introduction of the intent and purpose of the standards. We have a fairly comprehensive general requirements section, and that's where we touch on sort of the overall planning processes, submission requirements, that sort of thing. And then we have a number of individual sections which encompass sort of the considerations and the design criteria for the various infrastructure, roads, stormwater, fire protection, servicing requirements, that sort of thing. The general requirements section. So this was, some of this information was included in the previous version of the document. As I said, we gave it a comprehensive overhaul, updated it to reflect the zoning and the site plan applications, and then we added a number of new sections encompassing things that maybe didn't exist back in the previous version, but anyways, were something that the applicants need to be aware of. So development charges, site alteration permits, source water protection requirements, the Puss Lynch design guidelines, asset maintenance, trust funds, and asset management data. So road section. So we did an overhaul of the road section. To be honest, I guess maybe not that much had changed since in road design over the years, but kind of the major shift that we implemented in the document was to leverage existing information that was out there. So that's the Ontario Provincial Standards and the Transportation Association of Canada standards for roadway geometrics, design and construction. So again, just to avoid kind of duplicating information, and that kind of minimize the upkeep going forward, as we don't constantly have to be updating it as kind of information within those documents and manuals changes. We also added some new sections to update, or some new sections to cover things that weren't included in the previous standards, so sidewalks and curbs, daylight triangles, community mailboxes, driveway entrances, and signage. As part of the road section, we updated the township standard roads sections. So I've kind of got them here. So previously there was, the township had 8 standard road sections. We've consolidated it down into 2. So there's a rural cross section and an urban cross section. And then the different road classes are just covered. So we have one drawing for the rural road cross section and then covered the different road classes kind of just in the table down to the bottom. A lot of the information was duplicated across the previous 8 drawings. So just a general update, added some information in terms of where the utilities go in the cross-section, that sort of thing. And the urban cross-section as well, same thing, consolidated 4 drawings into one. And again, updated, added the transformers, added the locations for the utilities. Other than that, they were, I guess, pretty much the same. Stormwater management, so we gave the stormwater management section a bit of an overhaul as well. This section required a lot of updating to bring it kind of up to current industry standards in terms of stormwater objectives and criteria. So some of the big changes that we implemented here were adding runoff quality control, requirements for runoff quality control, adding requirements for overall site water balance, adding, so formerly the documents really just required quantity control in terms of stormwater management. So that kind of brings it up in terms of the industry standards. We've also added in, language encouraging use of low-impact development techniques within the township, and then made reference to some other kind of important criteria like the sub-watershed studies that have been adopted within the township, and then introduced information related to the role of other approval agencies such as the conservation authorities, MTO, and County of Wellington in approving stormwater management in the township. Lot grading and fire protection. These sections, there wasn't a whole lot of updates that were required to these sections, kind of minor updates to bring it to current industry standards. We did meet with the township building and fire departments to bring it up to current fire protection standards for the township, and did update the standard fire protection standard drawing as well. Water and sewage servicing, so this is an entirely new section that wasn't in the previous version of the standard. Just formalizing the requirements for on-site, private on-site servicing, formalized just made the statement that the township does not review and comment on private systems falling under MECP jurisdiction, constantly changing, which is basically systems that are over 10,000 liters a day. And then we did introduce some requirements for hydrogeological reports and nitrate impact assessment to support the private on-site sewage systems as well. The utilities and street lighting section was also updated. basically introducing, or I guess maybe more so formalizing some of the policies around the need for directional lighting and preventing light trespass for site plans, and then kind of bringing up to standard in terms of township street lighting, introducing the requirements for LED fixtures, controlling the CCT color of the lighting fixtures, and introducing the need for the township to provide approval in terms of the fixtures that are being installed in the township. Parkland and landscaping. There was a big overhaul done on this section. This work was not done by myself. This was done by GWS in consultation with, or coordination with the county planning staff. So I understand, so added criteria for parkland, added in reference to the cash in lieu of parkland bylaw. There were significant updates to address shift in provincial policy, which I understand impacts significant woodlands, added in some references to the County of Wellington tree bylaw, updated the kind of approved planting list within the township, and added in the requirements for landscaping buffers. And that's the last section of the standards that basically covers off the updates.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Balmer.
Thank you very much. Welcome all. I really like this. This is, I like the way it's laid out. I like the clarity of it, and I like the fact that it introduces some sort of an overview of different things and directs you to get where to find the specifics. But I have a couple of questions and maybe concerns about some of the, where they may not be, I mean, I'll go through a few things, and if I take up too much time, just shut me down and I'll send it to you electronically. Under site plan approval, it talks about site plan approval is required for the following activities, and it talks about a new building or structure. And then if you go to the next part where it says it's not required for a detached, semi-detached, or for dwellings. As far as I know, a dwelling is a structure. So it just seems odd. I read these. I try to read these things as if I don't know what it's about, and somebody's picked it up for the first time. And I was wondering, in my mind, I think of site plan control is required, and generally for commercial, industrial, and the residential are exempt. And I just thought, since we're going to direct them to the actual document, that was a contradiction that stuck in my mind as I read it, and I had to go back and forth a few times until I finally realized. You're starting out by saying all, but these are exempt. But so it's a minor thing, but it's stuck in my head as trying to read it as a beginner. And I don't know if we could make that a little clearer, so that people understand the first statement. Yeah, the two don't contradict. You know what I mean?
Yep, through you, Mr. Mayor. Certainly, I guess sometimes when we write these things, when you deal with it every day, you kind of think you understand the wording. But we could definitely clarify that wording.
These are all minor. That's what I realize the same thing. I can talk with acronyms, and then I talk to someone who's not in the business, and I've lost them.
Through you, Mayor, we would have to clarify if it was a multi-residential unit.
Perfect.
We can take that back and give that some additional thought.
Yeah.
Because single residential dwellings typically would not require site plan. I actually don't know of any multi-residential dwellings in the township, but if one was to come forward, that most likely, like a semi-detached home would probably not require site plan, but something more than that, a fourplex, sixplex, a high-rise, that would require site plan. So we can take that back and try and wordsmith that a little bit.
Super. Just because we're going to direct them to the actual document, I realize we don't have to capture everything. But the other one was, it says farm-related buildings and structures are also exempt. So if I was looking at this and I said, farm-related buildings and structure exempt, but as we just discussed with the actual site plan, it's some or most. We want to make sure we have a flag here for people that, so if making sure this is consistent with the actual site plan control bylaw would be helpful, just to, because I think of this as helping to flag documents they need to review. Does that make sense?
Through you, Mayor, yeah, that makes sense, and we just listened to the comments regarding the site plan bylaw, so we can take that back and do some comparison and some wordsmithing as well.
Perfect. Oh, this is a tricky one, too. It says that the 2.4 site plan approval process does not apply for properties that will be subdivided for single-family homes and where a residential right-of-way is proposed. Is that what how number 4 reads?
Sorry, 2.
Yeah, right. So site plan doesn't apply to where a new residential, where it's for residential purposes and a new road is being proposed. Does that mean that if no municipal right-of-way is being proposed, it's exempt?
Through you, Mayor.
If it's a 6-lot subdivision with no new road?
Through you, Mayor. I think the second part of that identifies that it would be then subject to a plan of subdivision application.
Yes, yeah, but the qualifier is, it would be a residential lot and have a new, so that it has to be both these things to be exempt, because it'll be under the plan of subdivision. What if it doesn't have the road? Is it still be dealt with under plan of subdivision? Because you can have a plan of subdivision without a new road. We've had them before.
Okay. We'll have to take that back and have some thought on that.
Same thing happens with the plan of condominium, plan of subdivision. It suggests it's an and. It has to be all right? It has to have the right-of-way proposed to be subject to a plan of subdivision. But perhaps it doesn't, perhaps it just has to be a plan of subdivision whether it has a road or not.
I believe even if there was a plan of subdivision, say there was a plan of subdivision and there was going to be, let's assume, 4 new lots on an existing township road, then each one of those lots would not be required to go through site plan. But the subdivision itself would be required to go through the subdivision planning process.
That's right. But the way this is worded, it says it has to it would only be subject to it if it has the lots and a road, and a new road.
Maybe, we'll look at it. I would probably suggest eliminating the paragraph in totality, so to eliminate any confusion, because if you're not going through site plan, you're going through subdivision, end of story. So we'll maybe just eliminate the paragraph.
Okay.
Okay. Site alteration permit. That's good. I'm glad it's mentioned here. People are aware of it. Would this be a good place to identify where site grading associated with a building permit ends and site grading associated with a site alteration permit begins? The building permit's pretty clear that it's typically only the fill needed to protect the structure or to support the structure, however the wording is. Everything else beyond that is, that's not covered in the building code. Is it possible to put a notation in here as to where that line is, so people know where, based on the amount of fill they might want to do, whether it'll be building building permit covered or site alteration covered?
I would suggest that this wouldn't be the appropriate place, because this is our municipal standards for development. If you're wanting to enforce where that comes into play, I would suggest that it should be in an actual bylaw. So when the township is looking at reviewing its site alteration bylaw, then that might be the appropriate place to put it.
Oh, okay, I understand. I'm not talking about enforcing anything. I'm just talking about informing people where the building code ends and where site alteration begins. But I agree with you if it's an enforcement issue, but we're talking about here a document about helping people direct them to the appropriate places. I see this as a map as opposed to.
Yeah, but I don't believe there is a definition. It's in the CBO's discretion in terms of you're looking at the actual plans that you approve through the issuing of the building permit that dictates how much fill you're actually bringing in. So I think it would be difficult to define.
Okay, well, other municipalities, in my years of working as a contractor, other municipalities clearly define that up front.
Yes, in their bylaws, where I've seen it, is where I've seen it.
Okay, well, we can look at that. General requirement for lot grading. It talks about showing the seasonal high water elevation and that foundations will be kept half a meter above the seasonal high water mark. And I wondered, how do we determine what that seasonal high water mark is?
Through you, Mayor. That can be done in a couple of ways, or maybe I should ask Stan to answer that, but I'll maybe give my thoughts first. Typically, if it was a subdivision, there would be a hydrogeological report required, and there would be a time frame, probably a year or longer. The development or the proponent would measure water levels to try and determine that. On single-family homes, they're kind of exempt from this.
Okay.
So that's kind of just done by either test pitting, sometimes when they do their test pitting related to their septic system design or something like that. We were involved with, for a number of years, reviewing site plans related to rural developments, like single homes on a rural road, and we were kind of asking for that information just to avoid any homes being constructed close to the water table and, have an issue with sump pumps running and stuff like that.
Well, and that's where I was thinking is, I've seen several houses built with multiple sump pumps on individual lots. Plan a subdivision that usually gets captured in the hydrogeology. So I guess the grading plan, because that's only associated, grading plan is only associated with the plan of subdivision, that's why this doesn't come into effect on the individual lots, because they're not subject to site plan control or maximum embankment slopes. We have lots of, it talks about retaining walls required where there's slopes of greater than 3 to 1. If someone happened to have some work done on their property, but you're not suggesting that we can't have slopes of greater than 3 to 1, it's just we can't create slopes of greater than 3 to 1. Like, you're not asking people to eliminate natural slopes of greater than 3 to 1, just.
Through you, Mayor. No, we would look at each application individually, but generally, if they're creating a new slope, it would have to be 3 to 1 or less.
Good, okay.
That being said, they may be subject to additional reporting, such as slope stability reports and stuff like that.
Especially if that was a risk to, if it was public accessing it.
That's correct.
Okay. Large sewage systems, you touched on this, and you said we don't comment on the larger ones. We have in the past. I recognize we don't approve them, but we have commented to the MECs, the Ministry of Environment, Parks. And we also have a letter on file from the township solicitor recommending that we do not sign responsibility agreements for these large communal systems for residential use. Do we need to flag any of that for people, that these are not saying we certainly have seen applications for them for industrial and commercial properties, but are these different? This is the ones for the residential, are they different than these?
We're thinking, just hang on a second.
No, I don't understand the question.
Well, typically, the jurisdiction for a septic system over 10,000 liters a day is with the MECP. So you don't have, the township doesn't have jurisdiction on that.
No.
Essentially, the township needs to ask the proponent, the developer, the constructor, to provide approval, that they've received approval from the MECP.
Through the building permit process.
The building permit process.
But we've often review and comment on that permit, during that permit process. To the.
I don't
I'm
think.
not sure about historically,
Yeah.
but I know that
I'm not aware
lately
of it.
we've not
So-
been providing comments on large systems and just saying they're under the jurisdiction of the MECP.
But what about the large communal systems that we have responsibility agreements for?
Well,
We certainly commented on those.
well, yes, but they've been approved through the actual development process themselves, whereas in those cases, the MOE of the day
Yeah.
has indicated that they won't approve those systems without the township entering into a responsibility agreement with that particular developer.
Right. And has that changed? Those rules changed for those?
Not that I'm aware of.
So we still have the letter on file suggesting we don't sign those responsibility agreements, so I just didn't know if we should.
I'm not aware of the letter you're referring to,
Okay.
Councillor Balmer.
I can make you aware of that.
Okay, that would be great.
One last one. Sorry, I don't have it. Don't have the number. It has to do with fire tanks, the fire protection tanks. It was a typo, unfortunately, that it requires them to be, if you just look at it, it's, I think the sentence got cut and paste backwards or something about keeping them full, hooked up to something with a backflow preventer, and the tanks are supposed to be kept full, but it says full tanks kept or something like that. So, anyhow, that's all I have.
Yeah, there's the type.
Right. Thank you.
Councilor Bowe, Councilor Goyette?
13.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm actually really quite pleased with this document. I find it easy to read. It's comprehensive. The language is such that it's not legal, full of legal jargon that is maybe more difficult for the average person to make sense of. There's a couple of things that stood out to me as being really good. The first thing is in the very first paragraph. It says that these standards have been prepared as a reference guide and that it is intended to provide consistency in documentation received in order to facilitate and add efficiency to the approval process. Yeah. And I think that is an important statement because it shows not only do we want to have the approval process be less cumbersome for staff, consultants, council, but it also shows a shift, I think, to a more business-friendly way of, we're looking to streamline the process and reduce the time and confusion in getting applications approved and setting clear expectations. And the second thing that I really like is the part about pre-consultation. And to me, I think that is a game changer, really, for everyone involved. As someone who has gone through the site plan approval process, I found it incredibly difficult to navigate through. It was frustrating for myself. I'm sure it was frustrating for staff, council, for everyone. And as a result, it caused a lot of extra expense and a lot of extra time. And that was very difficult. So I wish, we would have had this pre-consultation at that time, because I can definitely appreciate how valuable that would have been for myself as well as for staff and council. And I think by completing this pre-consultation, we're setting clear expectations up front for both the applicant and the township so that there's a lot less back and forth and this perception of red tape. And I think it also gives the applicant an opportunity to understand the planning process, and I think sometimes that's very difficult. So I really like all of that. In saying that, attached to this document as Schedule A was the application checklist, and I don't know if this is a new thing or if we had it before, but I think it's really good. I think there's a couple things that could be added to it to make it even more clear. The first thing I would say is it may be good to title it pre-consultation meeting checklist so that there's no confusion that this checklist actually forms the application itself, so that it's clear as to what this checklist is for. And as proposed, there's a different checklist for site plan approval and a separate one for zoning bylaw, but really they're essentially the same. They have all the same components. So just in a sort of an effort to reduce the amount of paperwork, I'm wondering if we can combine them into one and just have like a check as to, is this for site plan approval or is this for zoning bylaw? And again, in an effort to make things more clear, so that checklist has a list of reports that I guess you'd check off if it's needed. But I'm wondering, to be really clear, if there could be an actual box beside each report saying required yes, check, or no, check, so that we know what we're dealing with and exactly what is required and what's not required. Understanding that throughout the review process, there may be more reports required, but I just think it makes it really clear and concise. And in addition to that, maybe even adding a column to reference where the requirements for that report fit into the report, like, I don't know, sewage systems, C-section, blah, 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 and even an area for comments. And I honestly think that would make things go so much quicker and smoother for everyone involved. Other than that, the only other question I had was, I didn't see anything in here, and I don't know if it's supposed to be in here, about barrier-free accessibility, or if that's a different, something different that would be referred to and not part of this.
Through you, Mayor. It is in here somewhere. I can't remember off the top of my head exactly where, but we do reference the Wellington County Facility
Okay.
and Accessibility
Okay.
Manual in here. Can't remember exactly what section.
Okay,
it is off the
and parking standards, I didn't see that, like the size, the width, all that kind of stuff.
So that's all covered in the zoning bylaw. So
Okay.
we didn't duplicate that information here. I suppose reference could maybe
Okay.
be made linking the two.
Okay. And the last comment I would say is, I'm not sure if this has been circulated to PDAC, but I'm wondering if it would make sense to do that.
It has not at this.
No, it has not. We certainly can. I guess two things I'll touch on. The intent here is to get council's feedback today. If there are more specific things that you just want us to take into consideration, we ask that you submit those to us within the next couple of weeks. Further, we'll be posting a notice and indicating to the public that it's posted on our website for a 30-day period. So if the public want to give any feedback, they can do so. I do just want to point out, with respect to this development of this, like I know working with Amanda and the other consultants, but primarily Amanda has been the point person on this. She has done an excellent and thorough job on it. And the intent, as Councillor Goyda has indicated, is that some of the frustration I feel from the developer side are those individuals coming through the process have expressed is that they don't know upfront exactly everything that they have to provide. So I think these checklists, whatever the title may be, the understanding is that our consultants and township staff are clearly identifying at the outset what's required and why it's required to eliminate that frustration. So that is completely the intent of developing those checklists, because we did not have them before.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Just a slight clarification on the checklist. While they do look very similar on page 1, page 2, there are slight differences.
Okay.
So, for instance, a site plan approval requires additional items such as cost estimates, legal surveys, spills management plans, and they require more plans about the development than a zoning bylaw. But it is the hope that through the pre-consultation meeting is that would be the opportunity to identify generally, 95% of all the reports or plans that we would be expecting in a formal application.
Sure, thanks.
Councillor Spillis?
Yes, I'd like to object to base document and not duplicating a lot of different standards, and you do make references to a lot of standards, which certainly makes the volume considerably less. I've looked online at some other municipalities, and you're looking at 500, 600-page document. That's not where we want to be. A couple of things. You do mention the asset management trust funds, and I was wondering if you want to consider adding other things in there, like lighting appurtenance, that sort of thing. It's for your consideration. Think about it. If you think it's necessary, great. If you don't put it in. Another thing is adding requirement the developer submit a financial impact analysis for operating maintenance cost and impact on township development costs. I don't know if it'd be helpful to our financial people. I guess she's not here. But something like that, at least the staff doesn't do the extra work that it's done by the consultant ahead of time. You may want to consider that. Another one would be any extraordinary items that are special. Like, for instance, you would assume street lighting would be your standard luminaires out of a Cobra mount or whatever the case may be, and somebody wants to put in pedestrian scale lighting. Well, that's extra cost in terms of maintenance. There's more of them fixture-wise, so you may want to put in something that they contribute something 10% of capital costs for maintenance and in the future. I know you've had in the past asked for spares type of thing, but spares versus 10%, I don't know what would be preferred. So lighting's an example. I don't know if there's any other extraordinary items, like somebody wants a fancy gateway type of thing that you're going to be maintaining. That may be another thing. Some minor stuff. The drawings, I don't know if you want to add the preferred location for things like fiber optic or cat cable. It's, you have the lighting there. I know you have a duct bank showing telecommunications, but usually tap-offs are off something buried in the middle, beside a ditch or whatever. And, yeah, you mentioned electronic format. I missed that first time around, and probably I missed it because I was looking for something you want, AutoCAD blank, blank, blank type of thing, but I don't know if we want to put that in there or not, type of format you need.
Through you, Mayor, I think at the moment we're seeking the applications in PDF format.
Was that right?
I believe so. Like essentially that's the format that most submissions are made in. Even when we're doing development applications, we're submitting everything in PDF.
So you might as well just say that, PDF.
That's right. The only, like larger municipalities do require drawings in AutoCAD, but they also have staff and they have records management systems that can work with AutoCAD, and the township doesn't have that in-house capabilities.
Not yet.
MCO, did you recall?
I don't know if Amanda's about to say, I think we stuck to the electronic format, just, I would say stick to that wording and indicate at the time that when we're dealing with the particular applicant, the specific format, just because due to the changes in technology, maybe I'll be taking it in LFF format late in the future, I have no idea.
You want to leave it open for the future. Okay, gotcha. Okay, that's all I had, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe?
What more can I say? I think this is long overdue, and I think it's a great document, and I'm happy with it.
Okay, thank you. I think our council has done a wonderful job, and I think Madame CEO mentioned that we have some time. If some other changes come to mind, we can reach out, so we still have a bit of time to do that. And I agree with Councillor Roth, it's an excellent document, and hopefully it'll assist the developers in knowing the path they have to take and not being surprised. So thank you very much. All right. Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Balmer, that Council receives GM Blue Plan report dated April 24th, 2019, with respect to the municipal development standards. All in favor? Carried. You want to take a 5-minute break? Does anybody want a washroom break? Washroom break? No? No?
Thank
Going
you.
once? Going twice?
Bye.
Okay, we'll move on to intergovernmental affairs. Right, Madame CEO? Pull it up, first one. First one is the Bill C-68 from Cheryl Gallant. Any questions or comments on that one? Seeing none. Okay, the next one is the Upper Grand District School Board, the long-term accommodation plan. Any questions or comments on that one? All right, this one is from Senator, National Fitness Day. Any questions or comments on that one? No, is there any desire from council to pass a resolution supporting the senator on this? I know I know the merit of a resolution, but is there any desire there? He specifically asked for it. No? Okay. All right, the next one is Guelph Notice of Draft Condo. Any questions or comments on that one?
Oh, I do have a question. I just wanted to, I guess, maybe clarify. I was going to suggest that perhaps we should submit comments that talk about this, the barrier between the buffer zone. Thank you, Mayor Sealy. But I just want to, but this building is already being built, so I'm not exactly clear on what they're asking for comments for here.
Just give Madame CEO a second. She's going to.
Oops, I grabbed the wrong item.
It says proposed draft plan of condominium, and I guess maybe that's different than site plan. Yeah.
It is.
So is this just for information because we're a neighbor?
Well, yes, so we're within the 1 kilometer radius of this particular boundary, and this is just the actual notice of the actual application. So there
Okay.
will be opportunity, because they will have to move towards a public meeting on the matter as well. Now, what were you referring to in terms of what was built?
If you remember when we were talking about the Clare Maltby
Yes.
development, and we had put forth comments that we wanted to have a greater buffer. And so, I mean, because this is right across from township rural area, I was going to suggest that we would request the same sort of buffer here as well. But then when you drive by the site, it's already been built. So, I mean, we can't really ask that question at this point in time. So I was just a little unclear as to, they're saying that it's open for comments, but I didn't really understand what they were asking for comments on.
Okay. Okay, I can explain that.
Okay.
Okay, so it's going from an apartment to a condo.
Oh, okay.
I didn't catch that part initially.
Okay.
Okay, so that's why.
Okay. Okay. Fair enough. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? All right. The next one is the Elections Ontario. Any questions or comments on that one? No? Just have to scroll down here. All right, next one is the Upper Grand District School Board Annual Report from 2018. Any questions or comments on that one? All right. Here's a Town of Minto Council meeting correspondence. Any questions or comments? Okay, this is Dufferin Aggregates Aberfoyle Pit Neighbors Notice. Any questions or comments? Seeing none. Okay, and the Brantford Resolution. Any questions or comments? And the last one is the Township of Tudor and Cashel Resolution. Any questions or comments? No? All right. Moved by Councillor Spula, seconded by Councillor Goida, that the intergovernmental affairs correspondence lists items listed on the council agenda for May 1st, 2019 council meeting be received. All in favor? Carried. All right. Intergovernmental affairs report. None for Postage Fire, none for planning. We're done. Let me flip my page. There, none. Mayor's any notice of motions? And nobody's come up with one. All right, we're at bylaws, I guess. Municipal announcements. Any municipal announcements? Councillor Spillis?
Yeah, the Green Legacy tree day went off with a great hitch, apart from the wind.
Yeah, but you managed that.
Yeah, we got $282 in donations. We got 310 pounds of food donations, and we distributed all the trees.
Excellent.
So thanks to the help from Councillor Roth, Councillor Bloomer, Councillor Goida, and her 3 kids who were the life of the party there.
No kidding.
And our cameo appearance by the mayor.
Yes.
And his 2 kids.
They did help carry some trees out to a trunk before we had to leave. They enjoy helping. I think a lot of children, in our community love giving back, so that's excellent. Thank you, Councillor Spoulis, and all the rest of council for volunteering that day. It was cold. Any other municipal announcements? No? Okay. Unfinished business? No. Bylaws? All right. Moved by Councillor Balmer, seconded by Councillor Roth, that the following bylaws be taken as read 3 times and finally passed in open council. A bylaw being a bylaw to authorize the entering into an amending site plan agreement with 2120826 Ontario Ltd. 20 Brock Road North. Any questions or comments? All in favor? Carried. Yeah, I wouldn't either. Okay. Conforming bylaw. Moved by Councillor Rowe, seconded by Councillor Balmer, that the following bylaw be taken as read 3 times and finally passed in open council. Bylaw 028-219, being the bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council for the corporation of the Township of Portslade at its meeting held on the first day of May 2019. All in favor? Carried. Moved by Councillor Balmer, seconded by Councillor Rowe. The council hereby adjourn at 3:44 p.m. All in favor? Carried. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.